I picked up my daughter-in-law's coat from the dry cleaners. The owner, a man I'd known for many years, suddenly pulled me aside and whispered, "Listen to me carefully. Take your grandchildren and get out of this town before sunrise." I froze and asked him, "Why?" He pulled out a small plastic bag, and with a trembling voice, he said, "Because I found this inside your daughter-in-law's coat. When I saw what was inside, I couldn't breathe." Without thinking, I held my grandchildren tight and, "I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has traveled." As evening fell, the day's heat still clung to my fingers while I carried the heavy basket from the market. Sweat soaked my blouse, and I walked slowly down the old street where the peeling paint on the walls told the story of this town's many years. Arthur's dry cleaning appeared on the corner. The faded wooden sign swayed in the wind. I stopped. I pulled the wrinkled yellow claim ticket from my purse. That morning, Chloe, my daughter-in-law, had pressed it into my hand, her voice soft but rushed. "Mom, please, pick up the wool coat from Arthur's. I have meetings all day. End." I nodded without much thought. To me, it was just one more errand, like so many I always did for my children. When I walked in, the smell of fabric softener mixed with the steam rising from a corner. Arthur, an old man with glasses perched on the end of his nose, was behind the counter, flipping through a notebook with his bony hands. I handed him the ticket. He glanced at it and nodded, wordlessly disappearing into the back storeroom. He usually sent the young man who worked for him, but today he went himself, moving slowly, as if he were trying to buy time. I waited without a worry, stroking the handle of my basket, thinking only about what I would cook for my grandchildren that night. He returned with Chloe's coat, carefully wrapped in clear plastic that smelled of softener. But instead of handing it to me, he stopped. He scanned the shop, making sure no one else was there. I thought it was strange, and before I could ask, his rough, calloused hand gripped my arm tightly. "Eleanor," he murmured in a hoarse voice, almost a whisper, "come here for a moment." Without giving me time to react, he led me behind a worn-out curtain that covered the back of the shop. The smell of bleach and steam made it hard to breathe. Piles of clothes waiting to be ironed were stacked like a messy wall, hiding something. "You need to see this," he said, his voice trembling, as he opened a rickety drawer under the counter. From it, he pulled out a small, clear plastic bag, just big enough to make my heart stop. Inside was a bank transfer receipt, stamped in red, with a figure so large I had to look at it several times to be sure I wasn't mistaken. Millions of dollars. Who would keep something like that in a coat pocket? And next to the paper, a photograph. The innocent faces of Sophia and Leo, my grandchildren, with circles drawn over them in a red marker. They were crooked, angry circles, as if drawn in a fit of rage, or worse, with a dark intention. I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice, my hands as cold as stone. "Arthur, what is this?" I stammered, my voice breaking. He shook his head, his eyes filled with fear, as if even he couldn't bear what he had found. "Eleanor, you have to get the children out of here immediately. Don't waste a second. You must be gone before sunrise." His voice was harsh, almost pleading. I wanted to ask him more. I wanted an explanation, but he just placed the bag in my hand, repeating, "I can't keep this here. It's too terrifying." I took the coat, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I tucked the bag deep into my pocket, feeling like I was carrying a bomb about to explode. As I left, my steps were uncertain, as if I were walking on air, unable to feel the ground beneath my feet. The basket tipped, and a few tomatoes rolled out, nearly falling onto the sidewalk. Outside, the world continued with its usual noise, the squeal of a bus's brakes, the calls of street vendors, the laughter of children running down the street. But in my head, only Arthur's insistent voice echoed, repeating like a funeral bell. Before sunrise, the sky darkened, the shadow of dusk swallowed by the thick night. I entered the house, my feet as heavy as stones, the zip-top bag holding the terrifying secret still deep in my pocket, burning like a curse. The large house, once filled with the laughter of Sophia and Leo, was now frozen in an icy silence. Ben, my son, was on a business trip in Denver, hundreds of miles away. It was just me, my two small grandchildren, and the terrifying emptiness Chloe had left behind. My phone vibrated, a short message from my daughter-in-law. "Mom, I have an unexpected meeting. I'll be very late. Please take care of the kids." I stared at the words on the screen, and a nameless anxiety rose in my chest. Was it true, or just an excuse to hide something? I walked into the living room, where Sophia and Leo were focused on playing with blocks on the old rug. Sophia, a 7-year-old girl with big, round eyes, was carefully building a little house out of colorful pieces. "Grandma, look, my house has a chimney," she shouted excitedly, her voice as clear as bells. Leo, the little one, only 4 years old, was beside her, hugging a plastic dinosaur, murmuring a song without words. Seeing them, my heart clenched. Just a few hours earlier, I thought they were safe in the arms of their family, but now, the image of the 2 red circles on the photo haunted me, like an invisible threat lurking somewhere. I forced a smile, stroking Sophia's head. "It's beautiful, my love. Rest for a bit, Grandma will make dinner." But in my mind, everything was spinning. Arthur's voice wouldn't stop. "You have to leave before sunrise." I didn't know what I was running from, but my instincts as a mother and a grandmother told me those 2 children couldn't stay here a minute longer. I walked silently to my bedroom, locked the door, and with a trembling hand, I dialed the number of Grace, a nurse friend I trusted completely. Grace and I had been through so much together, from the lean years raising our children to the endless nights caring for my husband in the hospital. If there was anyone I could trust now, it was her. "Hello, Grace. It's me, Eleanor," I whispered, my voice cracked with worry. "I need your help. Do you know a reliable taxi, one that can make a long trip, tonight?" Grace was silent for a moment, perhaps sensing the strangeness in my voice. "Eleanor, what's wrong? Why the rush?" I took a deep breath, holding back tears. "I can't explain right now. I just need a cab, as soon as possible." Grace didn't press, only answering briefly. "I'll call my brother. He's a driver, very discreet. Give me 10 minutes. I nodded, even though I knew she couldn't see me, and hung up with my heart in a knot. I went to the kitchen, my hands moving quickly. I took some bread from the cabinet, sliced some cheese, and packed some cookies the children loved. I put a couple of water bottles in a small bag, wondering what else I should bring. I didn't know where I was going, only that my grandchildren couldn't go hungry or be left helpless. From the kitchen, I looked toward the living room. Sophia was showing Leo how to build a bridge. Their laughter was like knives in my chest. They were so innocent, so carefree, with no idea of the storm that was about to break over our family. I wondered if I was wrong, if it was all a misunderstanding, and I was overreacting. But then the image of the photo with the 2 red circles reappeared in my mind, and I knew I had no other choice. I ran to the children's room. I opened the closet and grabbed a few items of clothing. The blue sweater Sophia likes, Leo's superhero pajamas, several pairs of socks. I also packed the yarn doll Sophia always hugs when she sleeps, and the toy car Leo never lets go of. I threw everything into a large suitcase, messy, but I didn't have time to organize anything. The streetlight flickered through the window, making my heart pound. I drew the curtains, afraid a curious neighbor might notice my strange haste. This town is small. Everyone knows everyone, and I didn't want anyone asking questions. The phone vibrated again. A text from Grace. "The taxi is here. It's on the corner. My brother's name is Mike. You can trust him." I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I went out to the living room, knelt beside Sophia, and gently shook her shoulder. "Let's go, my love," I whispered in the sweetest voice I could manage. "Put on your coat. We're going for a night ride." Sophia looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. "A night ride? Where to, Grandma?" I smiled, though inside I was a wreck. "To a very fun place. But we have to leave now, or it will be too late." Leo rubbed his eyes, starting to complain about being woken up. "I'm sleepy, Grandma," he mumbled drowsily. I pulled a piece of candy from my pocket and put it in his hand. "Here, be a good boy. Come with me, you can sleep later." Leo grinned from ear to ear and immediately forgot about being tired. I picked him up, took Sophia by the hand, and hurried toward the taxi waiting on the corner. The hallway to the door seemed endless, my sandals dragging against the cold floor, rushed and trembling. I put the children in the back seat and carefully buckled their seatbelts. Sophia hugged her doll, looking at me with curiosity, but still trusting. Leo let out a long yawn, resting his head on his sister's shoulder. I sat next to them, clutching the suitcase to my chest, my heart heavy. The driver, a middle-aged man with a tired face, watched me in the rearview mirror. "Where are you headed at this hour, ma'am?" he asked, his tone concerned. I swallowed hard, my voice breaking. "To the bus station, please, as fast as you can." The car started, breaking the stillness of the night. Through the window, I watched the house recede, sinking into the darkness like a tomb holding secrets and betrayals. The bus station at midnight was as bustling as a market that never sleeps. The neon signs, green and red, flickered over old posters, making my head spin. The calls of street vendors, the horns of buses, and the screech of suitcases rolling on the concrete mixed into a chaotic concert. And yet, that disorder made me feel safer, as if my grandchildren and I could get lost in the crowd and escape the invisible gaze that was watching us. I held Sophia's hand tightly. Leo was sleeping soundly on my shoulder. His warm breath on my neck reminded me that I had to stay strong, even if I felt broken inside. I approached the ticket counter, trying to sound calm as I asked, 3 tickets to Charleston, the last trip of the day." The ticket agent, a man with a messy mustache, glanced at me and the children. Then he slid 3 tickets through the window. "It's leaving immediately. Get on quick, or you'll miss it," he said in a monotone voice. I nodded, paid, and turned to Sophia, forcing a smile. "We're going to visit a distant relative. We're going to have a great time." The girl nodded, though her big eyes reflected curiosity. "Which relative, Grandma? Do I know them?" I stroked her head, avoiding her gaze. "It's an old family member. You haven't met them yet. Get some sleep. It's a long ride." Sophia nodded again, hugging her yarn doll tightly, her eyes fixed on the bus window. The bus pulled away, the roar of the engine breaking the night's silence. Leo remained asleep on my shoulder, his head lolling, his hand still clutching his toy car. I looked outside, the streetlights blurring past like fading memories. Charleston, the place where I had lived more than 20 years ago, was the only option in my head at that moment. It was there that my husband and I built the first years of our marriage, where Ben was born, and where I once felt safe. Now, I just hoped that city would be a refuge for the 3 of us, even if only temporarily. But deep down, I knew I wasn't just running away. I was searching for a way to face a truth I didn't yet dare to name. When we arrived in Charleston, it was already dawn, the pale light filtering through the old rooftops. I carried Leo and led Sophia to a small motel hidden behind the central square. The room was cramped, with a faint smell of dampness, and a double bed covered in faded sheets. I put both children on the bed and tucked them in. Sophia murmured in her sleep, "Grandma, where's Mommy?" That question pierced my heart like a dagger. I just stroked her head and whispered, "Sleep, sweetie. Your mommy is busy. She'll be here in a little while." But I knew very well it was a lie. Chloe, the daughter-in-law I once loved so much, was now an enigma, a dark shadow I didn't dare to face. I sat by the window, my hands clasped, my mind racing. The plastic bag was still in my coat pocket, as heavy as a curse. The transfer receipt, the photo with 2 red circles, and Arthur's warning were pieces of a puzzle I didn't know how to begin to solve. I thought of Ben, my son, who was so far away. I wanted to call him, to tell him everything, but every time I picked up the phone, I stopped. If I was wrong, if it was all a misunderstanding, I would destroy his family. But if I was right, if Chloe was really involved in something terrible, how could I tell my son that the woman he loves, the mother of his children, could be betraying all of us? In the midst of my confusion, an idea sparked. I had to go to the church. Father Michael, the elderly priest in Charleston, was the only one I could trust right now. He had been with me when my husband died. He held my hand through the darkest days. If anyone could help me find my way, it was him. I decided that morning I would take the children to Mass, to pray for peace and to find a way out. The next day, I woke Sophia and Leo. I helped them get dressed. "Come to church with me, and I'll buy you ice cream afterward," I said, faking cheerfulness in my voice. Leo got excited. "Chocolate, Grandma?" I smiled and nodded. though inside I was filled with worry. We walked to St. Francis Church, where the ancient stone walls and the ringing of the bells gave a rare sense of calm. Sophia held my hand, while Leo ran ahead with his toy car dangling from his fingers. Looking at them, all I prayed for was to preserve that innocence forever. Father Michael recognized me as soon as I entered the church. His white hair shone under the light streaming through the stained glass windows, and his kind but piercing eyes looked straight at me. "Eleanor, it's been too long," he said in a warm voice. "What are you and your grandchildren doing here? Is something wrong?" I just nodded, unable to speak in front of the children. After Mass, I let Sophia and Leo play in the church's backyard, where other children were running around. I asked Father Michael for a private conversation. In a small, quiet room behind the altar, the smell of old wood and melted wax helped me breathe easier. Gathering my courage, I told him everything. Chloe's coat, the transfer receipt with a huge sum, and the photo of Sophia and Leo with 2 terrifying red circles. I handed him the plastic bag, my hand shaking. Father Michael was silent for a long time, his hands clasped together, his face growing harder by the second. Finally, he sighed and said in a grave voice, "Eleanor, this is beyond what a priest can handle. This isn't just a family matter. This is a much greater danger. You need someone who understands the law." He paused, looking at me with deep concern. "I know someone who can help. Victoria, a very good lawyer and a parishioner here. She'll know what to do." I nodded, feeling a ray of hope light up in the darkness. That same afternoon, in the small confessional, I met Victoria for the first time. She was young, maybe a little over 30, with short hair and eyes so sharp they seemed to see everything. Wearing latex gloves, she carefully opened the bag and examined the receipt under the dim yellow light. "This transaction code belongs to a ghost company registered through an offshore account," she said, as her fingers typed quickly on her laptop, her face serious with concentration. "A non-existent company." She paused and pointed to the last line of the document. "Signed by Julian Cortez." That name meant nothing to me, but when Victoria looked at Father Michael, they exchanged a meaningful glance. "That man has been involved in financial fraud and money laundering," Victoria said in a low voice. "This is not simple, Eleanor." I felt my hands, resting on the wooden table, begin to tremble. "But why my grandchildren?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why are their faces marked in red?" Victoria didn't answer right away. She just looked at me with compassion. "We need to investigate more," she said finally. "But the first thing is for you and the children to stay here, where you'll be safe. I will contact some trusted colleagues to look into this." Father Michael placed his hand on my shoulder, his voice soft but firm. "Eleanor, God will protect you and your grandchildren, but you must be strong for them." I hugged Sophia and Leo as we left the church. As the gray afternoon covered the cobblestone streets, the bells rang behind us, reminding me that I was no longer alone. The next day, I found myself in front of a motel door in Charleston, my heart on fire. Sophia and Leo were playing in the yard of Grace, my old nurse friend whom I trusted completely. Through the wooden fence, I watched them. Sophia was teaching Leo how to blow soap bubbles, and their crystal-clear laughter filled the sunny morning. I smiled, but that smile felt heavy, as if every second spent there was stolen from them. "Grace, can you watch the kids for a day?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "I have to go back to my town to sort out some important personal matters." Grace looked at me. Her sharp eyes seemed to want to ask more, but she just nodded. "Don't worry, Eleanor. The children will be fine with me. I'll make them pudding and tell them stories." I squeezed her hand, saying nothing more, but with infinite gratitude in my heart. I took the first bus of the morning back to town, huddled in a seat at the back, the plastic bag still in my coat pocket, a constant reminder of the terrifying secret I was carrying. The landscape passed by the window-dry cornfields, dilapidated houses, but I saw nothing but the image of the 2 red circles on the photo of Sophia and Leo. I wondered what I was doing, if it was right to leave the children behind and return to this dangerous place. But I knew that if I wanted to protect them, I had to uncover the truth, no matter how cruel. The family house appeared as the bus pulled into the last stop. It was silent, cold. It was no longer the home Ben and I had built over so many years. Now it felt like a crime scene waiting for me to discover it. I took the spare key from the bottom of my purse, my hand trembling as I opened the gate. The squeak of the hinges echoed in the silence, making me turn my head with a start. The street was deserted, only a few dogs barking in the distance. I went inside and locked the door, feeling like I was crossing into another world, where everything I had believed could crumble. The living room was just as I had left it the day before. Chloe's light blanket was thrown carelessly over the sofa, as if she had been there just hours ago. On the side, a half-drunk cup of coffee, the dried foam now a brown stain. I stood there, looking around, trying to find some sign, some clue to explain what was happening. But the air inside the house was heavy, as if even the walls were keeping secrets. I didn't hesitate any longer, and went straight to Ben and Chloe's room, where I knew there was something I needed to check. Under the closet, the small gray safe was still there, motionless like a silent accomplice. I remembered Ben's birthday a few months ago, when Chloe, drunk after several shots of tequila, had blurted out the combination while laughing with me. "Mom, you wouldn't believe it, Ben always tells me to change the code, but I like May 12th, 2018, our wedding day." At the time, I just laughed, thinking it was an unimportant detail. But now, that sequence was the key to opening the door to the truth. I knelt, dragging the dust-covered safe out. My hands shook as I turned each number. 120518. The dry click echoed like a gunshot in the silence, making my heart leap. I opened the heavy door of the safe, breathing heavily. Inside, stacks of dollar bills were neatly piled. The green glow left me stunned. Tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, a sum my family had never dreamed of. Next to them, a pile of fake passports and IDs, with unfamiliar names. Maria Gonzalez, Juan Alvarez, Sofia Morales. I flipped through them one by one, my heart pounding as if I were reading a list of ghosts. In a corner were 2 sealed cell phones, ready to be activated on some plan. But what took my breath away were the papers at the bottom. 3 business-class plane tickets from Chicago to Madrid, in the names of Chloe, Sophia, and Leo. Ben's name was not there. I checked them over and over, hoping I was mistaken, but the cold truth was like a knife piercing my chest. Chloe was planning to escape, to take my grandchildren, and leave my son behind like an obstacle. I pulled out one more envelope, my hands trembling. Inside there was a photo, Chloe, smiling radiantly, next to an unknown man, elegant in a black suit. On the back of the photo, a handwritten scrawl, "My Cortez." That name, Julian Cortez, matched the signature on the transfer receipt. The whole room began to spin, the air grew thick, and I struggled to breathe. I sat on the floor, my back against the dresser, the photo falling from my hands. Chloe, the daughter-in-law I had loved like a daughter, the one who cooked with me for family meals, the one who hugged me crying when Ben had trouble at work. That woman was betraying us. Not only was she betraying Ben, but she was also planning to take my 2 grandchildren, as if they were part of a deal. I thought of Sophia, with her innocent smile as she drew pictures for me, and of Leo, with his habit of hugging my legs whenever I baked. How could she be so cruel? How could she circle their little faces with a red marker, as if they were merchandise? At that moment, the familiar sound of my neighbor, Mr. Henderson's truck, rumbled down the street. I jumped. Hurriedly, I put everything back in the safe, trying to leave it as it was. My hands were shaking so much that I dropped a passport, but I managed to pick it up. I pushed the safe back into place and closed it. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like a guilty person's. I stood up, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and tried to calm down. As I headed for the door, I spotted a torn envelope in the kitchen trash can, with the logo of a foreign bank shining in the light. Instinctively, I took it. I put it in my jacket pocket without a second thought. When the door slammed shut behind me, I walked out onto the street as if floating. I knew I wasn't just running away. In my pocket, I carried the proof of a terrible plan. Chloe planned to escape with Cortez, taking a fortune, abandoning Ben, and worst of all, taking my 2 grandchildren with them as part of the deal. I returned to the motel in Charleston, my legs heavy as lead and my pocket still holding the horrible evidence from the house. It was now midday. The dim sunlight filtered through the slits of the thin curtains, falling on the old wooden floor. Sophia and Leo had just woken up from their nap. They were on the bed, rubbing their eyes. Sophia, her hair tangled, looked up at me, her big, innocent eyes wide. "Grandma, when are we going home to Mommy?" Her question was like a knife in my chest. I knelt, stroked her hair, and tried to smile, though I knew the smile was forced. "Soon, my love. Your mom is busy with something. Stay with me for a few more days, okay?" But my throat was closing up. I couldn't say more. Leo, hugging his plastic dinosaur, interrupted. "Grandma, I want cookies." I nodded. I took a package from my bag and gave it to him, just to hide the fact that my hands were still trembling. I took both of them to the motel's small courtyard, where there was an old swing set. "Play for a while. I'll watch you from here," I told them, trying to sound calm. But inside, I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff. What I had found in the safe, the stacks of money, fake passports, plane tickets, and the photo of Chloe with Cortez would not stop tormenting me. I knew I couldn't stay here forever, nor could I keep running without facing the truth. But how could I protect my grandchildren if their own mother, whom I once trusted, was part of this nightmare? Later that afternoon, Victoria arrived. Her steps were quick, but her eyes reflected concern. She was accompanied by two men in plain clothes, though their bearing made their cold professionalism clear. They introduced themselves as federal agents, showing credentials with official seals. "Ma'am, I'm Agent Miller," one of them said in a grave, firm voice. "This is my partner, Agent Davis. We need to see everything you've found." I nodded and led them to the cramped rental room, where a small wooden table had become the center of the entire truth. I spread everything out on the table. The receipt for a massive transfer, the envelope from the bank, a photo of Chloe, smiling next to Cortez, 3 plane tickets to Madrid, and a stack of fake passports. Each object was like a new stab, reminding me of Chloe's betrayal. Agent Davis took a still-sealed cell phone and connected it, via a USB cable, to a small device. His laptop screen lit up, showing lines of code running at high speed. "We can recover the deleted data," he said without looking up. "These things usually hold more information than people think." I remained seated, my hands clasped, my heart pounding hard. Outside, Sophia and Leo were playing in the courtyard, their laughter reaching me, but I didn't dare to look. I felt that if I lost control for even a second, I would let out the pain that was suffocating me. After a few tense minutes, Davis turned the screen towards me. There was a photo folder, and the first image was again of Sophia and Leo. Their innocent faces were circled in red marker, distorted with a cruel intention. I held my breath, as if the air in the room had vanished. Agent Miller pointed at the screen. His voice lowered, as if trying to prevent me from breaking down. "Ma'am, this isn't a personal mark. It's a symbol used in human trafficking networks." The word trafficking sounded like a thunderclap, leaving me paralyzed. He enlarged the image and showed a series of tiny numbers in the corner. "It's a transaction code. The red circle means target selected. The children are part of a much larger plan." Instinctively, I wanted to hug my grandchildren, even though they were outside, as if I could protect them from that terrifying truth. My eyes filled with tears, but I refused to cry. I didn't want the little ones to see me. "You mean, they plan to sell my grandchildren?" I asked in a trembling voice, barely audible. Miller nodded with a look full of compassion. "We don't know the whole plan yet, but this evidence points to an organized criminal network." "And the woman in this photo?" he asked, pointing to Chloe. "Most likely an accomplice." Victoria placed her hand on my shoulder, and her voice trembled too. "Eleanor, this is no longer a family matter. It's an extremely serious criminal case. We're going to do everything we can to protect the children." But her words couldn't calm the storm inside me. Chloe, the daughter-in-law I had loved like a daughter, who was with me when Leo was born, who shared laughter on so many family nights. How could she be so cruel? How could she turn 2 children, her own blood, into targets for a dirty business? Davis continued typing on the laptop, pulling up messages that had been deleted. One appeared, short but cold. 2 targets selected. Ensure timely delivery. The message was sent from Chloe's number to an unknown number, Signed, J.C. Julian Cortez. I felt the blood in my body freeze. She really did this, I murmured, not knowing who I was talking to. Victoria took my hand, squeezing it gently. Eleanor, I know this hurts so much, but you have to be strong for the children. They told me to stay calm, to act as if nothing was wrong. Do not communicate with Chloe, Miller said in a firm voice. She must not know what you've discovered. We need time to investigate further. I nodded, but my heart was in a tangled mess. How could I pretend to be normal when every breath carried the pain of betrayal? How could I look into Sophia's and Leo's eyes, knowing their mother had planned to sell them as if they were merchandise? I brought the 2 grandchildren back to the room, trying to play with them as usual. Grandma, tell the story about the vampire, insisted Leo, climbing onto my lap. I hugged the boy and told him the story he loves, but my voice broke, as if I myself were lost in a nightmare. Sophia was on the side, drawing with colored pencils, humming a song. I looked at them, and my chest ached as if it were being torn apart. They were carefree, innocent, not knowing their world had been on the verge of being shattered by the very mother they loved. Outside, black clouds gathered, and a sudden downpour began. The rain beat hard on the motel's tin roof, marking the rhythm of the chaos in my chest. I drew the curtains, hugged the children, trying to protect them from the storm outside and the storm within me. The next morning, a black car pulled up in front of the motel, with no license plate, no lights, but I knew it was a federal police vehicle. Victoria had called earlier to tell me to get ready. Eleanor, today we're going to plan everything, she said over the phone, her voice confident, though with a hint of concern. I quickly put on a sweater. I woke the 2 grandchildren and asked them to stay with Grace for one more day. Where are you going, Grandma? Sophia asked, with those big, curious eyes. I stroked her head, trying to force a smile. I'm going to see an old friend. I'll be back for you in the afternoon. Mateo, nibbling on a cookie, nodded without asking further. I kissed them on the forehead and got into the car, my heart as heavy as if I were carrying the whole world on my shoulders. The federal police office in Charleston was hidden on a narrow street, with no sign to indicate that serious cases were handled there. I went in and was taken to a small meeting room where the smell of old coffee and papers hung in the air. Victoria was already waiting, seated at a long table. Across from her were 3 officers, Miller, Davis, and a female officer named Hayes, whose gaze was both stern and gentle. Eleanor, we've reviewed the evidence you gave us, Miller began in a grave but sharp voice. This is a major case, related to an international crime ring. We need your cooperation to capture Chloe and Cortez. They explained the plan. To create a fake scene where Sophia and Leo had disappeared, to make Chloe and Cortez panic and reveal their movements. We will monitor all their communications, Hayes said, pointing to a screen showing a map of the city. We've installed a listening device on Chloe's phone and are tracking Cortez's number. They will contact each other, and then we will have enough evidence. I listened, but my heart tightened. And my grandchildren, will they be safe? I asked, my voice trembling, unable to hide my fear. Hayes put a hand on my shoulder with a firm look. Don't worry. We have arranged an absolutely safe shelter for the children. You will be able to video call them whenever you want to see them. And they took me to another room where a social worker was playing with Sophia and Leo in a room full of toys. Sophia was coloring a picture, and Leo was building with Legos while babbling a story about a spaceship. Seeing them, I felt like crying. They didn't know I was trying to protect them from their own mother. Eleanor, the children will stay here with me, the social worker said in a soft voice. I will take care of them as if they were my own. I nodded, hugged my 2 grandchildren tightly one more time before leaving, feeling like I was leaving a part of my heart behind. That night, I returned to the motel and sat alone in the small room, phone in hand, waiting. Victoria and Davis were with me. The listening device was on the table, and the laptop screen glowed with the messages being monitored. Just as we expected, my phone vibrated. A message from Chloe, in a desperate tone. Mom, where are you? Have you seen the kids? They're gone. I've called the police. I'm scared to death. I read the message and felt my heart clench. How could she fake it like that? How could she write those words when she herself had planned to take my grandchildren away? Davis motioned for me not to answer, just gently shaking his head. "Let her get tangled up on her own," he murmured. Half an hour later, Chloe's phone called an unknown number. The listening device activated, and her voice came through the speaker, nervous and trembling. "Cortez, the children are gone. I had everything ready, but I can't find them anywhere." The man's voice on the other end was hoarse and annoyed. "Calm down. We can't back out now. The plane tickets are already bought. The buyer on the other end is waiting. If we don't have the merchandise, we'll be in big trouble." The word merchandise was like a knife twisting in my skin. I clenched my fist, my nails digging into my palm, trying to hold back tears. Sophia and Leo, my two little angels, being called merchandise. I wanted to scream. I wanted to go confront Chloe. But Davis motioned for me to be quiet, his gaze cold. The call ended, but Chloe continued sending messages to Cortez. "If we don't find the children, the whole plan will fall apart. You have to do something." Davis gave a cold smile. "Let it fall apart. That's how it should be," he said in a grave voice. "This confession will be irrefutable evidence at trial." Victoria took my hand and squeezed it gently, as if trying to give me strength. "Eleanor, we're almost done with this," she said, but her voice also broke, as if she herself felt my pain. I stayed there, my cold hands clasped, feeling both a deep fear and a strange relief. Relief because I knew Chloe and Cortez were digging their own graves, but the pain still crushed my chest. I thought of the past days, when Chloe was a shy young woman newly arrived in the family, when she would sit with me in the kitchen, kneading bread and telling me her dream of opening a small shop. I loved her. I thought she was part of the family, but now every memory was like a wound that opened wider each time I recalled it. Outside the window, the night was thick, without a single star. I heard the soft murmur of several unlit car engines parked silently on the street corner. They were like beasts in waiting, patiently biding their time. I looked at Victoria, then at Davis, and felt like I was entering a chess game whose end I did not know. "Eleanor, you did the right thing," Victoria said, her voice low but firm. "You saved your grandchildren." I nodded, but inside, a doubt began to grow. Had I really saved them? Or was I just dragging them into a new nightmare? That night, darkness covered Charleston like a thick veil. I was sitting inside a federal police command vehicle, parked 2 blocks from a cheap hotel on the outskirts of town. The air inside the car was heavy, the smell of engine oil and cold coffee mixing and making it even harder for me to breathe. Victoria was beside me, her gaze as hard as steel, but her hands were clasped tightly, as if trying to contain her tension. Officer Hayes, who had reassured me that morning, was adjusting the radio, her voice deep but clear. "Eleanor, you just stay here and listen. We'll handle everything." But how could I be calm when my heart was beating so hard it felt like it would burst from my chest? Sophia and Leo were safe in the police station's playroom, but the mere thought that I was about to witness Chloe's betrayal made me tremble. Over the radio, short, sharp commands were heard, like knives. "Alpha Team, position on the northeast corner. Bravo Team, control the rear exit. The target is heading to the meeting point." I clenched my hands tightly, my nails digging into my palms, trying not to show my fear. Victoria placed a hand on my shoulder and murmured, "Eleanor, it will all be over tonight. You did the right thing by getting the children out." I nodded, but tears were already streaming silently down my cheeks. The right thing? What had I done besides run away and ask for help? Yet, deep in my heart, I knew I had no other choice. I had to protect my grandchildren, even if the price was facing the heart-wrenching truth about my daughter-in-law, whom I had once loved like a daughter. Hayes turned on the live feed from the listening device, and Chloe's voice echoed, shaky and fast. "Cortez, I don't understand. Where are those 2? Without them, what are we going to deliver in the deal?" Every word cut me like a knife. Deal. That word made me want to scream, to lunge out and slap her. How could she refer to Sophia and Leo, her own children, as if they were merchandise? Cortez's hoarse, rough voice replied, "Shut up. First, let's go to the hotel. The intermediary is already waiting there. If we don't bring the merchandise, we're finished." I held my breath, as if the air inside the car had vanished. Intermediary. Merchandise. Those words were needles in my chest, reminding me that this wasn't just a family betrayal, but a monstrous crime. Hayes whispered into the radio. "The target has entered the parking lot. Prepare to move in." Through the microphone, I heard the dull thud of a car door closing, then rapid footsteps on the concrete. I imagined Chloe and Cortez, two tense figures moving towards the empty parking lot, unaware they were walking straight into the trap set by the police. Suddenly, a firm shout tore through the quiet. "Federal police, hands up." The thunder of running boots, the click of flashlights turning on, and then a sharp scream from Chloe, so piercing it ripped through the night. "No, it can't be," she cried, her voice filled with terror. Over the radio, I heard sounds of a struggle. "Cortez, run!" Chloe yelled, but immediately an officer ordered, "Freeze, put your hands up, or I'll shoot." There was a thud, then the sound of Cortez's body hitting the ground next to a white van. "Don't move," another voice commanded. I heard the metallic click of handcuffs being fastened. Chloe was crying, her voice in pieces. "You're mistaken. I didn't do anything." But then I heard her purse fall to the ground, stacks of money spilling out, and the cold voice of an officer. "Do you have anything else to say?" Sitting in the car, I couldn't hold back anymore. Tears streamed silently down my cheeks. I didn't know if I was crying with relief because the trap had worked, or with the pain of facing the truth that Chloe, whom I had considered a daughter, was willing to sell my 2 grandchildren. Victoria took my hand, squeezing it tight. "Eleanor, they've got them. The children are safe," she said, her voice trembling. But the pain inside me did not subside. I thought of those nights when Chloe would sit with me, laughing, sharing small dreams. I believed her. I loved her. I thought she was part of the family. Now, all that was left was a ghost, someone who had wanted to destroy everything. A voice came over the radio, brief but authoritative. "Both targets secured. Operation successful, no casualties." Outside, the sirens all went on at once. The red and blue lights spun, reflecting off the old hotel walls. I heard patrol car engines starting, voices giving orders, hurried footsteps. The night seemed torn apart by chaos, but for me, it was the sign that the net of fate had finally closed. A few weeks later, I sat in the courtroom of the federal courthouse in Charleston. The air was heavy, thick, as if the walls held secrets. The benches were filled with neighbors, mixed with a few reporters armed with cameras and notebooks, their gazes sharp, ready to record every moment. I held Sophia and Leo tightly, the children snuggled against me, as if they could feel the tension in the air. Victoria was beside me, rubbing my back, whispering, "Eleanor, it will all be over today. You have been very brave." But how could I feel strong when my heart was in pieces? The truth about Chloe, about her terrible plan, was about to come to light, and I knew it would leave scars impossible to erase on me and my grandchildren. Chloe appeared in the defendant's box, wearing a beige prison jumpsuit, her hair tangled, with no trace of the radiant daughter-in-law I had known. Her face was gaunt, aged 10 years, her eyes sunken, as if her guilt also haunted her. Beside her, Cortez trembled, his hands cuffed, his head down, unable to look at anyone. Seeing him, I didn't know what to feel: rage, pain, or just a cold emptiness in my chest. I had loved Chloe. I had believed she was part of the family. I even defended her in her fights with Ben, but now she was just a stranger, a woman who had tried to sell my grandchildren as if they were merchandise. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with a firm voice, stood up and began to speak. "Your Honor, we are trying a particularly serious case related to money laundering, conspiracy to kidnap children, and participation in a transnational criminal organization." He presented the evidence one by one, each piece like another stab in my heart. The transfer receipt with a huge sum appeared on the large screen. The numbers in red made the whole room murmur. Then he showed a pile of fake passports, strange names that recalled the criminal network Chloe and Cortez were involved in. 3 plane tickets to Madrid, only in the names of Chloe, Sophia, and Leo, were projected, making me squeeze my grandchildren's hands tightly so they wouldn't notice my trembling. But what made the room erupt was when the photo of Sophia and Leo appeared, with 2 crooked red circles marking their faces. Some women in the back rows exclaimed, "How horrible!" The murmur grew like a wave, filled with indignation and horror. I immediately pulled Sophia and Leo close, covering their eyes. "Grandma, what is that?" Sophia whispered in an innocent voice. I stroked her head and replied with a broken voice, "Nothing, sweetie. It's just an old photo." But inside, I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry until I was empty. How could I explain to them that their own mother had marked them as targets for a criminal enterprise? The prosecutor continued, his voice growing sharper as he presented the recording of the phone call that changed everything. Chloe's voice filled the room, desperate but icy. "Cortez, the children are gone. Without them, what are we going to negotiate with?" Cortez's voice responded curtly. "First, go to the hotel. The intermediary is waiting." The entire room fell silent. Only Chloe's ragged breathing could be heard over the speaker. I heard every word as if it were being branded into my mind. Every phrase of hers was a knife, shattering the memories of the days when I believed she was family. Chloe's defense attorney stood up, trying to save her. "Your Honor, my client is a victim, manipulated by Julian Cortez. She was unaware of the trafficking network and had no intention of harming her children." But the prosecutor immediately retorted, his voice as sharp as a razor. In the recording, the defendant herself says she needed the children to negotiate. That is the act of an accomplice, not a victim. He pointed to the screen, where the tape replayed, and Chloe's words echoed like an undeniable confession. Cortez remained silent, head bowed, like someone accepting his fate. When the judge's gavel struck, the entire room froze for a moment. The defendants, Chloe Lopez and Julian Cortez, are sentenced to lengthy prison terms for money laundering, conspiracy to kidnap children, and participation in a transnational criminal organization, the judge declared, his voice deep and firm. The room erupted in comments. Some shook their heads in disgust, others whispered in horror. I sat there, squeezing Victoria's hand, breathing a sigh of relief, but with a bitter knot in my throat. Justice had been served, but it couldn't erase the pain in my heart. Sophia tugged at my blouse, her voice very quiet. "Grandma, where's Mommy?" The girl's question pierced me like a knife. I hugged her tightly, unable to answer. How could I tell her that her mother, whom she loved, was being led away in handcuffs behind bars? Leo, sitting beside her, looked up with wide eyes. "Did Mommy go on a work trip, Grandma?" I just nodded, silent tears falling. "Yes, she's very busy, but Grandma and your dad will always be here with you, okay?" They both nodded, but I knew this truth would remain as an eternal scar on their hearts. When we left the courthouse, the scorching midday sun beat down on the square. People were dispersing, their laughter and conversations mixing with the noise of traffic, but for me, everything seemed to fade away. Victoria took my hand and said softly, "Eleanor, you saved the children. You are their hero." I smiled weakly, but inside, I didn't feel like a hero. I was just a grandmother, a mother, trying to protect what little was left of my family. The truth, however cruel, had finally come to light. Several months have passed since the trial, and my two grandchildren's lives and mine have slowly found a new rhythm in Charleston. I rented a small apartment near the central square, where every morning the church bells ring as clear as a peaceful melody, pulling me out of nightmares about Chloe and Cortez. The apartment isn't large, just a small living room, a kitchen nook, and 2 narrow bedrooms. But for me, it's a sanctuary, a new home for Sophia and Leo. Every morning, I wake up early and make breakfast. An egg sandwich for Leo, cookies and milk for Sophia. I comb Sophia's hair, straighten the collar of Leo's uniform, and walk them to the elementary school near St. Francis Church. Seeing them run into the classroom, waving at me with a radiant smile, I feel a spark of hope sneak into my heart, even though the pain still burns like an open wound. One afternoon, while watering some chrysanthemum pots on the balcony, a yellow taxi stopped in front of the building. The door opened, and Ben got out, a travel bag over his shoulder, his shirt wrinkled from the long journey from Denver. My son was visibly thinner, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken as if they carried a story too heavy to bear. I dropped the watering can. Water splashed on the floor, and I ran to hug him. "Ben, you're back," I exclaimed, my voice choked, holding him tightly as if I feared he would vanish, just like those peaceful days that were gone. Ben hugged me back, then knelt and opened his arms as Sophia and Leo ran from inside the house, shouting excitedly. "Daddy! Daddy!" They threw themselves into his arms with laughter. And in that moment, I saw Ben's eyes light up, if only for a second. That night, the four of us sat around the small table in the kitchen. I made the chili that Ben had loved since he was a child, the aroma of corn and spices filling the house with warmth. Sophia told stories from school, and Leo showed off a drawing his teacher had praised. But the atmosphere was still heavy, as if we all knew there was an unspoken topic, something that had to be said. After clearing the dishes, I sent the children to their room to play with puzzles and sat down across from Ben. "Son, I have to tell you everything," I said in a grave voice, clasping my hands to stop them from shaking. I began to speak slowly. From that afternoon at Arthur's dry cleaners, when I received the coat and discovered the plastic bag with the transfer receipt and the photo of Sophia and Leo marked with a red circle, I told him about the overnight bus ride, about the safe under the dresser, about the plane tickets to Madrid without his name on them, and about the trial where the atrocious truth about Chloe and Cortez was revealed. Every word was like a stab, not just for me, but for Ben's heart as well. He remained silent, running his fingers through his messy hair, his eyes red, and when I told him the part where Chloe called the children merchandise to negotiate with, Ben slammed his hand on the table and his voice broke and said, "Enough, Mom." He stood up and began pacing in the small room, as if he couldn't bear the weight of the truth. "Mom, the truth is, I've suspected Chloe for a while now," Ben said, his voice full of anguish. "She used to leave early and come back late. She would hide her phone, and suddenly large sums of money would disappear from the house. I would ask her, but she always said it was for work. I didn't want to believe she could do something wrong. I thought I was protecting the family, but it turns out I was just a fool." He stopped, turned his face away, his shoulders shaking. I stood up, took my son's trembling hand, saying nothing, just silently sharing his pain. I knew Ben's suffering wasn't just from his wife's betrayal, but also from the feeling of helplessness at not being able to protect his two children. Sophia and Leo came out of their room silently, as if sensing the tension in the air. Sophia was hugging her yarn doll and asked quietly, "Grandma, is Daddy sad?" I nodded, pulling her closer and putting another piece of meat in her bowl. "Daddy is just tired from the trip. Eat up." Leo joined the conversation with an innocent voice. "Daddy, can we play with Legos tomorrow?" Ben smiled weakly and stroked his head. "Yes, we'll play tomorrow." But I knew that smile was nothing more than a mask to hide his broken heart. After dinner, when the children were in their room, Ben sat next to me and said firmly, "Mom, I'm filing for divorce. I'm going to get full custody of the children, and with you, I'm going to build a new life for them." I looked at him and saw in his eyes a determination I hadn't seen in a long time. "Are you sure, Ben?" I asked, my voice trembling. He nodded, squeezing my hand. "I can't forgive her, Mom. It's not for me. It's for Sophia and Leo. They deserve a safe life, and I will do everything to make them happy." I nodded, tears in my eyes. At last, my son had found the courage to face the truth, even though it hurt so much. That night, I stood on the balcony, looking at the dimly lit street. The yellow light from the lampposts cast flickering shadows. From inside the house, Ben's voice reading stories to the children mixed with the pure laughter of Sophia and Leo. And then the teddy bear said, "I'm not afraid of the dark anymore," Ben read. And I heard Leo exclaim, "What a brave teddy bear." The sound of pages turning added to the atmosphere, bringing a fragile but priceless peace. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and felt a little warmth return to my heart. Time passed quietly. The small apartment I had rented truly became a home, where little by little, the wounds of 3 generations began to heal. The court had already made its final ruling, granting full custody of Sophia and Leo to Ben and me. Hearing the news, I sat on the sofa, clutching a hot cup of tea, feeling as if the heavy weight that had been crushing my chest was finally lifted. Every Sunday morning, I took Sophia and Leo to the nearby park. The bells of St. Francis Church rang, mingling with the singing of birds in the trees. Ben, who now had a stable job in Charleston, would play football with Leo on the green grass. The boy, with his short little legs, would run after the ball, smiling from ear to ear. "Dad, kick it hard." Meanwhile, Sophia would happily ride her tricycle around the fountain, her high ponytail waving in the wind. I sat on a bench, savoring a hot cup of coffee, watching the three of them play under the Sunday. The light filtered through the leaves, scattering golden flecks on the ground, and in that moment, I felt a peace I had never felt before, as if the storm had passed and the sky was finally clear again. One afternoon, the whole family went to the market in the central square. The air was filled with the aroma of grilled hot dogs and fresh fruit. Sophia, her eyes shining, chose an old comic book for herself at a bookstall, eagerly flipping through each page. "Grandma, this one has a princess who rides a dragon," she exclaimed, showing me the book. I smiled and stroked her head. "You chose well. I'll read it to you tonight." Leo, on the other hand, insisted on a superhero-shaped balloon pulling on Ben's shirt. "Dad, buy it for me. Superheroes fly really high." Ben laughed, pulled out his wallet, and paid, while I quietly chose the freshest bunches of vegetables, some bright red tomatoes, and a bag of corn to make chili. These simple moments, like small pieces of a puzzle, were slowly putting the family that seemed to have been broken back together. In the apartment, I taped Sophia's and Leo's clumsy drawings to the living room wall. There was one with 4 people, me, Ben, Sophia, and Leo holding hands under a red roof, with a big sun and a few white clouds. Sophia pointed to the drawing, proud. "This is our house, Grandma. I chose the red roof because it's my favorite color." I looked at the picture with a soft smile, but I felt a lump in my throat. Their mother wasn't in the drawing, and I knew that no matter how hard I tried, that emptiness would always be there. I just hoped that Ben's love and mine would be enough to fill a little of that void in the children's hearts. Sometimes, I would see Chloe's picture in the newspapers, usually in short articles about the case, accompanied by a photo where she looked gaunt and lifeless behind bars. Every time it happened, I would hide the paper, burying it at the bottom of the trash can, not wanting Sophia or Leo to see it. They were too young to understand, and I didn't want their pure smiles to be stained by a cruel truth about their mother. But I knew that one day I would have to tell them. I would have to explain why she was no longer there. That thought made me shudder, but I repeated to myself that when the time came, I would find a way for them to understand without that pain destroying them. At night, when Sophia and Leo were fast asleep, I would sit at the kitchen table and open the old journal I had started writing in my first days in Charleston. My hand, now less shaky, would glide over the pages, leaving these words. "Today, Sophia drew a family. She doesn't know that this red roof is all we have, but I will do whatever it takes to make sure it always stands strong. They will grow up surrounded by love and truth, not lies or fear, and never again will anyone dare to use a red pen to mark their faces." I closed the notebook. I turned off the light, leaving only the sound of my 2 little angels' quiet breathing in the next room, and the soft murmur of the night wind coming through the window. Sometimes, in my dreams, I still see Chloe's image, not the one from the courtroom, but the one of that young woman who one day timidly entered my house, with a bouquet of daisies in her hand and a nervous smile. I wake up, and the tears fall silently, not out of nostalgia, but from the pain of a betrayed trust. But then I hear Sophia calling me cheerfully from the living room, or Leo's mischievous laughter as he plays with his dad, and I know I can't let the past drag me back down. I wipe my tears. I get up and prepare a new day for my little family. One night, after reading a story to my 2 grandchildren, Ben stayed with me in the living room. "Mom, I found a steady job here," he said, his voice deep but firm. "I want to stay in Charleston, raise the kids with you. We'll make it, right?" I looked at my son and saw in his eyes a determination I hadn't seen since he was a boy. "Of course, we will, son," I replied, taking his hand. "We'll make it, because we have each other." Ben smiled, and for the first time in many months, that smile was no longer heavy with burdens. In the darkness, as the streetlight filtered through the slits in the curtains, I understood that my family, after the storm, had truly been reborn. It was a painful rebirth, built on the broken pieces of trust and love, but it was full of hope. I got up, went out onto the balcony, and looked at the quiet street. The church bells rang in the distance, like a reminder that, no matter how cruel the past had been, we, me, Ben, Sophia, and Leo would keep moving forward, with love as a beacon lighting the way. In the depths of my heart, I understood that everything that happened wasn't just my family's tragedy, but also a warning to everyone. Sometimes, the person who hurts you is precisely the person you trusted the most. Naivety, blind faith, can become the open door for darkness to enter. But I also understood that the love and courage of a mother, of a grandmother, always have the strength to protect and guide. I want to tell everyone something. Learn to look closely at the strange signs. Don't close your eyes for fear of facing the truth. A family is only truly preserved when we have the courage to defend it with all our hearts and with firmness, even in the face of the most painful betrayal. The story you have just heard has had names and places changed to protect the identities of those involved. We don't tell it to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own homes? I truly wonder. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to remain silent to keep the peace? Or would you have the courage to face it all to reclaim your own voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can become a candle that lights the way for another. God always blesses, and I am sure that bravery will lead us to better days. For now, on the end screen, I will leave 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I think you will be surprised. Thank you for staying with me until this moment. The cold of the marble floor was the first thing I felt, a brutal shock that shot up my spine. One moment, I was the matriarch of the Ellison family, sitting at the head of my own Christmas dinner table. The next, I was on the ground, my 72-year-old body aching from the impact, looking up at the cruel face of my own son. His voice echoed in the sudden, deathly silence of the room. "This place belongs to my mother-in-law. Get out. N.E." Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. Just an hour before, the scene had been something out of a magazine. The Ellison Ranch in Dallas, our family's heart for over 40 years, was dressed in its holiday best. A magnificent pine tree, so tall its angel topper nearly brushed the vaulted wooden ceiling, glittered with a lifetime of ornaments. The fireplace crackled, casting a warm, golden glow on the faces of my family. The air smelled of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and pine, the scent of Christmas, the scent of home. I had spent the entire week preparing. My hands, though wrinkled, still knew their way around a kitchen, and my heart found joy in creating this perfect day for the people I loved most. My grandchildren, Emily and Jacob, had helped me decorate. Emily, at 16, was whip-smart and sensitive, with my late husband Frank's thoughtful eyes. Jacob, at 13, was all heart, a bundle of pure, uncomplicated affection. They were my world. My son, David, arrived with his wife, Monica, and her mother, Helen. I greeted them all with hugs, though Monica's was stiff, her cheek cold against mine. Helen, as always, was impeccably dressed, a picture of serene elegance, but her eyes, when they met mine, held a glint I could never quite decipher. It was a polite, smiling coldness. We gathered in the grand dining room. The long mahogany table was set with our finest china and silver, glowing under the soft light of a dozen candles. I moved to my customary seat at the head of the table, the place I had occupied beside my husband for 4 decades. It was more than a chair. It was a symbol of my place in this family, this home that Frank and I had built from nothing. As I was about to sit, David stepped forward. His face was pale, his jaw tight. "Mother," he said, his voice strained. Monica stood just behind him, her hand on his arm, a silent commander. Helen had already seated herself in the chair to the right of the head, watching the scene unfold with an unnerving calm. "Yes, David?" I smiled, though a knot of unease was tightening in my stomach. He cleared his throat. "That seat, Helen will be sitting there tonight." I blinked, certain I had misheard. "What are you talking about? Helen's seat is right there. This has always been my seat." I let out a small laugh, trying to brush away the absurdity of it. "Don't be silly, dear. Let's not be difficult on Christmas." "I'm not being difficult," he snapped, his voice rising. Monica's fingers tightened on his arm, a subtle squeeze of encouragement. "Things are changing. Helen is the senior woman here now. This place belongs to her." The words hit me like stones. The senior woman? I looked at Helen. She offered a small, sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was the smile of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. The air crackled with tension. The staff, who had been quietly serving drinks, froze in place. My breath caught in my throat. I looked at my son, my only child, the boy I had raised, and saw a stranger. "David," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "This is my home. You know what this chair represents." "It represents the past," he cut me off, his frustration boiling over into rage. "You're stuck in the past, Mother. It's time for new leadership in this family, in this company. It's my house now. It is not your house until I am dead," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, filled with a sudden, cold fury. That was when he did it. He didn't just ask again. He didn't argue. He lost all patience. He placed his hand flat on my shoulder and pushed. It wasn't a gentle nudge. It was a hard, deliberate shove, fueled by years of resentment I never knew existed. For a 72-year-old woman, it doesn't take much to lose your balance. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the leg of the chair. Time seemed to slow down. I saw Emily's wide, horrified eyes from across the table. I saw Jacob's mouth open in a silent scream. I saw Monica's lips curl into a faint, triumphant smirk. Then, impact. My hip struck the marble floor with a sickening thud. The sharp, blinding pain was immediate, but the emotional shock was worse. My wine glass, which I'd still been holding, flew from my hand and shattered against the floor, the sound as sharp and violent as a gunshot. A deathly silence fell over the room. It was broken by my grandson. "Grandma!" Jacob screamed, jumping up from his chair to run to me. But my eyes were locked on a small, blinking red light in the corner of the room. Emily, my beautiful, sensitive Emily, had been holding her new phone, intending to capture a video of our family's happy Christmas dinner. Her hand was shaking, but the lens was pointed directly at the scene. It had recorded everything: my son's cruel words, his violent push, my humiliating fall, the broken glass spreading like tears around me. I saw it all reflected in her phone's dark screen, the face of a heartbroken old woman on the floor, the victorious smiles of my daughter-in-law and her mother, and the face of the son I no longer recognized, standing over me without a shred of remorse. The war had begun, and they had just handed me my first and most powerful weapon. A betrayal of that magnitude doesn't happen in a single, explosive moment. It's a cancer that grows in the dark, fed by whispers and secret resentments. Looking back, I can see the signs were all there, like faint cracks in a foundation. I just didn't want to see them. The week before Christmas, while my heart was full of nothing but love for my family, the plot against me was already in motion. I remember that week so clearly. The Dallas air was crisp and cool, a welcome break from the usual Texas heat. The city was aglow with festive lights, and I felt a genuine sense of peace. Frank had been gone for 2 years, and the holidays were still tinged with sadness. But my grandchildren, Emily and Jacob, were a powerful antidote to grief. Their excitement was contagious. I spent an entire afternoon at Neiman Marcus, searching for the perfect gifts. For Emily, I found a beautiful first-edition copy of her favorite classic novel, bound in dark green leather. She had my husband's love for books, a quiet intelligence that saw the world with an artist's sensitivity. I knew she would treasure it. For Jacob, it was easier. He was all boy, full of energy and a love for the outdoors. I bought him the new mountain bike he'd been circling in catalogs for months, a gleaming machine of chrome and black. I pictured his face on Christmas morning and smiled to myself in the middle of the bustling store. I was so wrapped up in my joyful preparations, so blissfully unaware. I imagined them all at the ranch, opening their presents, the fire roaring, our family safe and happy in the home Frank and I had built. I saw David, my son, smiling as he watched his children. In my mind, he was still the boy who used to run to me with scraped knees, the young man who had looked at me with such pride at his college graduation. I was living in a past that, I now realize, no longer existed. While I was choosing wrapping paper, my son was sitting in a dark, expensive restaurant downtown, selling his birthright for a bowl of soup. I can picture the scene now as if I were a fly on the wall. The restaurant would have been one of Monica's choices, all sharp angles, gleaming chrome, and hushed, self-important tones. It was the kind of place where deals were made. A cold and sterile environment for a cold and sterile conversation. The 3 of them were there: David, my son, Monica, his ambitious wife, and Helen, her mother, the serpent in our garden. They would have ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Helen would have guided the conversation, as she always did, with the practiced skill of a master puppeteer. She never raised her voice. She never appeared angry. She simply planted seeds of poison with a gentle, concerned smile. "David, darling," I can hear her saying, her voice smooth as silk. "You know how much I admire your mother. Margaret is one of the strongest women I've ever known." She would have paused, letting the compliment land, disarming him. "But," she would continue, her tone shifting to one of deep, feigned concern, "the world of construction, of business. It isn't the same one she and Frank conquered. It's faster now, more ruthless. Her ideas, while well-intentioned, are outdated." David would have shifted uncomfortably in his seat. A part of him, the boy I raised, would have wanted to defend me. "Mother knows what she's doing. She helped Dad build Ellison Construction from the ground up." That's when Monica would have jumped in, playing her part perfectly. "Of course she did, honey," she'd say, placing her hand on his. "No one is denying that. But that was then. This is now." We just had a board meeting where she tried to earmark $1 million for a new local arts program. $1 million. We have competitors trying to undercut us on the Bridgeport contract, and she wants to fund a ballet. Helen would have nodded gravely. "It's not about the money, David. It's about focus. Your mother still sees the company as a family project, a way to do good in the community. That's lovely, but it's a liability in this day and age. You see the bigger picture. You have your father's head for business, but you're being held back." She knew exactly which buttons to push. His entire life, David had struggled under the weight of his father's legacy. Frank was a giant of a man, not just in stature, but in character and accomplishment. David, who was not as driven and not as brilliant, had always felt like he was living in his father's shadow. Helen's words were designed to hit him where it hurt the most. His insecurity, his desperate need to prove that he was his own man. "She needs to understand that her time of running things is over," Helen would have said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's your time now. You have to be strong, David. Not for you, but for your own family, for Monica, for your children's future." "She's right," Monica would chime in, her eyes hard. "We need to have complete control, David, full authority to make the tough decisions without having to run them by her for approval. It's time we took what is rightfully ours." The hesitation I imagine in my son's eyes is the most painful part. There must have been a moment, a flicker of a second, where his love and loyalty to me fought against the poison they were pouring into his ears. But it wasn't a fair fight. On one side was his mother, who he saw as a relic of the past. On the other were these two women, stroking his ego, promising him the power and respect he craved. He looked at Helen's serene, smiling face. He looked at his wife's determined, hungry expression. They were offering him a crown. All he had to do was betray his own mother. I can see him picking up his wine glass, his knuckles white as he gripped the stem. He stared into the deep red liquid for a long moment. Then he took a slow drink, placed the glass back on the table with a soft click, and gave a single, sharp nod. A silent agreement had been forged in the dim light of that soulless restaurant. The ambush was set, and I, miles away, was happily paying for a bicycle, completely oblivious to the fact that my own son had just agreed to push me out of my home, my company, and my life. A few days before the Christmas Eve storm broke, there was a quiet dinner, a false peace. It was just the four of us, myself, David, and the children. Monica was conveniently away at a spa weekend with her mother, a trip I now see was likely a final strategy session. At the time, I was just relieved to have my son and grandchildren to myself. I thought it was an opportunity to connect, to bridge the strange new distance I'd been feeling between us. I was a fool. I cooked David's favorite meal, pot roast, slow-simmered for hours until it was tender enough to fall apart with a fork, with creamy mashed potatoes and glazed carrots. It was the taste of his childhood, a meal I hoped would remind him of simpler, happier times. We sat at the smaller round table in the breakfast nook, a cozy space that looked out over the sprawling ranch lands as the Texas sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. For a little while, it felt normal. Jacob chattered excitedly about his school's basketball team, and Emily spoke quietly but passionately about a new photography project. I watched David listen to his children, a soft smile on his face, and my heart ached with love. I saw a glimpse of the man he was supposed to be, the man I had raised. That glimpse gave me the courage to bring up a subject that was dear to my heart. "David," I began, waiting for a lull in the conversation, "I had the most wonderful meeting today with the folks from the Children's Music Foundation." His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Oh?" I pressed on, my enthusiasm making me blind to the warning sign. "They're doing incredible work, providing instruments and free lessons to children in underserved communities right here in Dallas. Their current building is practically falling down, and they're trying to raise funds for a new facility. I was thinking, Ellison Construction could be the lead donor. We could fund the entire performance hall. Imagine it, darling, the Frank Ellison Performance Hall. It would be such a beautiful way to honor your father's memory." I looked at him, my eyes shining with the vision of it. Frank had been a quiet philanthropist. He believed that the wealth we created came with a responsibility to the community that helped us thrive. This project felt like a continuation of his very soul. David put his fork down with a soft clink against the china. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the suddenly quiet room. He took a slow sip of water, his eyes cold and unreadable. "Mother," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any warmth, "the company is not your personal charity fund." The words were so blunt, so dismissive, they felt like a physical slap. I stared at him, my smile faltering. I don't understand. It's a tax write-off, of course, and the PR would be wonderful. But more than that, it's the right thing to do. It's what your father would have wanted." "I'm not interested in what Dad would have wanted," he said, a sharp, cruel edge to his voice. "I'm interested in profit margins and shareholder value. We're in the middle of a bidding war for the new airport expansion. Every dollar counts. We are not a foundation, we are a construction empire, and I would appreciate it if you would let me run it as such." The air went thick with unspoken things. Jacob looked down at his plate, his cheerful energy completely extinguished. Across the table, Emily's eyes darted from her father's hard face to my stunned one. I could see the worry clouding her features. She felt the chill as keenly as I did. She knew, in that instant, that this wasn't a simple business disagreement. It was a power play. I tried to recover, to smooth over the ugly rift that had just torn through our meal. I forced a laugh, but it sounded brittle and hollow even to my own ears. "Of course, dear. You're the CEO. I was just making a suggestion." "Then please, keep your suggestions to yourself," he said, picking up his fork again as if nothing had happened. "I'll handle the business decisions from now on." I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream at him, to remind him that I wasn't just some board member. I was his mother, the co-founder of the very company he was so arrogantly claiming as his own. I had poured my own blood, sweat, and tears into Ellison Construction. My business acumen had saved Frank from ruin more than once, a fact we had always kept between us to protect his pride. But I looked at the children, at their troubled faces, and I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I just nodded. "All right, David." The rest of the dinner was an exercise in agony. We talked about the weather, about school, about anything and everything except the elephant that was now sitting at the table with us. But the pot roast tasted like ash in my mouth. The warmth of the room had evaporated, replaced by an icy cold that had nothing to do with the winter evening outside. As I looked at my son, I saw the full extent of Helen and Monica's influence. His words weren't his own. They were echoes of their cold, calculating ambition. He was wearing his father's suit, sitting in his father's chair, but he was a stranger to me. The loving boy I knew, the one who respected and admired his parents, was gone. In his place was this hard, resentful man who looked at me not with love, but with impatience, as if I were an obstacle in his path. That night, for the first time, I truly understood. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't a simple case of my son wanting to find his own way. A chasm had opened up between us, deep and wide, and perhaps impossible to cross. He wasn't just trying to run a company. He was trying to erase me from it. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the quiet dinner was just the first tremor before the earthquake. The drive from the ranch to Charles Bennett's office was a blur. The familiar Dallas skyline, usually a symbol of the empire Frank and I had built, seemed alien and hostile. Every glittering skyscraper felt like a monument to the corporate ruthlessness that had infected my son. My hip throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, but it was nothing compared to the pain in my heart. Charles Bennett had been my husband's lawyer, his best friend since they were boys, and the executor of his will. His office was an oasis of timeless dignity in a city obsessed with the new. It was paneled in dark mahogany, lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, filled with leather-bound legal tomes, and smelled faintly of old paper and good whiskey. It was a place of secrets and trust. He met me at the door, his usually cheerful face etched with grave concern. At 74, Charles was still sharp as a tack, with wise, kind eyes that had seen it all. He took one look at my face and simply said, "In here, Margaret. Let me pour you a brandy." I didn't protest. I sank into one of the deep leather armchairs facing his massive desk as he handed me a heavy crystal glass. The fiery liquid did little to warm the ice in my veins. He pushed me. "Charles," I said, my voice a hollow whisper. I recounted the whole sordid affair, the demand for my chair, David's cold words, the shove, the fall in front of my grandchildren. I spoke without tears, my shock having burned away everything but a cold, hard knot of grief. Charles listened without interruption, his hands steepled under his chin. He didn't seem surprised, which was somehow the most damning thing of all. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. "Frank saw this coming," he said finally, his voice heavy. "He prayed it would never happen, but he knew it might. He knew David's weakness." "What are you talking about?" Instead of answering, Charles rose and walked to a large oil painting of a Texas landscape that hung on the far wall. He swung it aside, revealing the dark steel door of a walk-in safe. He spun the combination dial with practiced clicks and pulled the heavy door open. From a private lockbox inside, he withdrew a thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed with the familiar Ellison family crest in dark red wax. My husband's seal. He placed it on the desk between us. Frank added a special provision to his final directives, separate from the main will. He called it his poison pill clause. My hand trembled as I reached for the envelope. A poison pill? That's a corporate term, a defense against a hostile takeover. "Precisely," Charles said, his eyes meeting mine. And Frank saw exactly what was coming, a hostile takeover of his family. He knew David was susceptible to influence, especially from Monica and her mother. He saw their ambition. "So, he left you a weapon of last resort." Charles leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "The clause states that if David, as CEO and majority shareholder, subjects you to provable and irrefutable public humiliation, you are granted the immediate right to purchase his entire controlling stake in Ellison Construction, all of it for the symbolic sum of $1 dollar. I stared at him, the air leaving my lungs. The audacity of it, the sheer strategic brilliance, was pure Frank. It was a master chess move from beyond the grave. But the implication was monstrous. He wanted me to bankrupt my own son? "No," Charles corrected gently. "He wanted to give you a choice. He wanted to ensure that you would never be at the mercy of David's weakness or Monica's greed. He was giving you a loaded gun, Margaret, and trusting that you would only ever use it if they backed you into a corner so tight you had no other way out." A loaded gun. The weight of it settled on me, heavy and cold. For a moment, I recoiled. To pull that trigger would be to declare total war, to destroy what was left of my family. It was unthinkable. Then Charles asked the question that changed everything. It's an explosive legal maneuver, and they would fight it tooth and nail. The entire case would hinge on one thing, the proof. The humiliation can't be just your word against his. It has to be absolute, undeniable, something a judge could look at and have no doubt. "Do you have proof, Margaret?" My mind, which had been a whirlwind of pain and confusion, suddenly went still and silent. The image that flashed behind my eyes was as clear as a photograph. The small, blinking red light of Emily's phone, the screen capturing the entire, horrific scene. My son's face twisted in anger, his hand on my shoulder, my body falling, the shatter of the glass, the triumphant smirk on Monica's face. It wasn't just proof, it was a verdict. I looked at Charles, and I felt the last of my hesitation burn away, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years, the cold, calculating fury of a woman who had just been handed the means to fight back. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. My memory of that evening now plays back in fragments, each one sharp and clear, like shards of broken glass. But the moments just before the fall are what haunt me the most. That was when the battle lines were drawn, not with a cannon blast, but with a whisper and a smile. That was when the air in my own home turned to poison. I was standing near the fireplace, speaking with Jacob about his Christmas wish list, when Helen made her entrance. She didn't just walk in, she arrived. She was wearing a deep emerald green velvet dress that clung to her in a way that was both elegant and vaguely predatory. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears, cold and brilliant. She moved through the room not as a guest, but as a queen taking possession of her court. I turned to greet her, a polite smile on my lips. "Helen, you look stunning. Merry Christmas." "Margaret, dear," she said, her voice a low purr. She air-kissed the space beside my cheek. "You've made the place look so festive, so traditional." There was a subtle emphasis on the last word, a hint of condescension that I chose to ignore. My unease began to grow when she didn't mingle. Instead, she glided directly to the dining room. I watched as she surveyed the magnificent table I had spent all afternoon setting. Then, with a quiet, deliberate grace, she placed her evening bag on the table, next to the chair to the right of the head, my husband's former seat, the seat of honor. And then she sat down, crossing her legs, the picture of serene entitlement. It was a blatant power play, and everyone in the room felt it. The serving staff, who were putting the final touches on the place settings, exchanged nervous glances. Even Jacob seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere, his cheerful chatter fading into silence. It was a declaration. She was no longer a guest. In her mind, she had already been promoted. I saw David and Monica standing near the entryway, their heads close together. They were a tight, conspiratorial unit. Monica had her hand locked on David's forearm, her crimson nails digging slightly into the fabric of his suit jacket. I couldn't hear her words, but I could read the intensity in her expression, the way her eyes bored into him. It was the look of a handler giving a final, urgent command to a prized animal before letting it off the leash. Later, piecing it all together, I could almost hear her whisper, her voice a venomous hiss in his ear. "It's time, David. The pleasantries are over. Are you going to be the man of this house? Or are you going to let her treat you like a little boy forever? Show her who's in charge now." I watched my son's face. I saw the conflict there, the flicker of doubt, the shadow of the boy who loved his mother. But it was fleeting. Under Monica's relentless pressure, his features hardened, his jaw set. He straightened his shoulders, pulling himself up to his full height, a pale imitation of his father's confident stance. He was steeling himself for what was to come. The writing was on the wall, in bold, cruel letters, and I had been too busy admiring the Christmas decorations to read it. The pressure from those two women was a physical force in the room. It was a vice, and my son was caught in the middle, being squeezed until his own character and conscience were crushed. Helen, with her silent, regal disapproval from the table, and Monica, with her sharp, whispered provocations, had become the puppet masters. David was about to dance on their strings. I decided to try and seize back control, to pretend this wasn't happening. I clapped my hands together, forcing a bright, cheerful tone into my voice. "All right, everyone. Shall we take our seats? The turkey is about to be carved." My voice cut through the thick tension, but it didn't dissipate it. The staff scurried to their positions. Emily and Jacob moved uncertainly toward their chairs. Monica gave David's arm one last, hard squeeze and then released him, a faint, knowing smirk on her lips. She had wound him up and set him loose. I turned and walked toward my chair at the head of the table, the one that had been mine for 40 years. Every step felt heavy, as if I were wading through water. Every eye was on me. The cheerful crackle of the fire in the hearth suddenly sounded deafening in the strained silence. This was it. This was the moment where the Cold War that had been brewing in my family was about to turn hot. As I reached for the back of my chair, I saw David move out of the corner of my eye. He wasn't walking to his own seat. He was walking directly toward me, his expression a mask of grim determination. The storm was no longer gathering. It had arrived. I don't remember getting up off the floor. I don't remember the hands that may or may not have helped me. My memory of leaving the dining room is a tunnel of roaring silence, the horrified faces of the staff and my grandchildren blurring into a meaningless watercolor of shock. The only thing I felt was the searing cold of the marble that had seeped into my bones and the even colder reality of what had just happened. My son. My own son had put his hands on me. I walked, not ran up the grand, curving staircase of my home. Each step sent a jolt of pain through my hip, a grim metronome marking my retreat. I kept my back straight, my head held high. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Not yet. I could feel their eyes on my back, a combination of shock, guilt, and I was certain cold-blooded satisfaction. My bedroom was my sanctuary, the one place in this sprawling house that was truly mine. It was decorated in soft creams and blues, filled with books and photographs of a life I thought I understood. I stepped inside, and the first thing I did was turn the heavy, ornate brass lock on the door. The loud, definitive click was the sound of a drawbridge being raised, a fortress wall being sealed. I was safe, for now. I leaned my back against the solid wood of the door and squeezed my eyes shut, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The dam of composure I had so carefully constructed was about to break. A sob, hot and raw, clawed its way up my throat. This couldn't be real. It was a nightmare, a grotesque distortion of a Christmas dinner. Any moment now, I would wake up. But the throbbing in my hip was real. The shattered image of my son's face, twisted with a rage I'd never seen, was real. A soft, hesitant knock came at the door. "Go away," I choked out, my voice thick with unshed tears. "Grandma?" A small, trembling voice whispered through the wood. "It's me. Emily. Please." My heart fractured a little more. Emily, my sweet, sensitive girl. She shouldn't have to see this, to be a part of this ugliness. But I couldn't turn her away. I took a deep, shuddering breath, wiped the single tear that had escaped from the corner of my eye, and unlocked the door. She stood in the hallway, her face pale and streaked with tears, her new phone clutched in her hand like a piece of damning evidence. She looked so small, so lost. "Grandma." "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I was just trying to get a picture of the candles. And then, and he..." She couldn't finish, her words dissolving into a fresh wave of sobs. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tight. "Oh, my sweet girl," I murmured into her hair. "This is not your fault. None of this is your fault. You hear me?" She nodded against my shoulder, but her body was still shaking. After a long moment, she pulled back slightly and held out the phone to me. Her hand was trembling so violently the device was a blur. I think you need to see this," she said, her eyes pleading with me to understand. I took the phone from her. Its cool, smooth surface felt alien in my hand. "Go to your room, sweetheart," I told her gently. "Lock your door. I'll come see you in a little while." She hesitated, looking as if she wanted to stay, to protect me. But she saw the new, hard look in my eyes and simply nodded, giving my hand one last squeeze before turning and hurrying down the hall. I locked the door again and walked on unsteady legs to a wingback chair near the window. Outside, the last light of day had faded, and the vast Texas sky was a blanket of dark, indifferent velvet. For a moment, I just sat there, the phone heavy in my lap. Did I really want to see it? Did I want to relive the single most humiliating moment of my life? Part of me wanted to throw the phone against the wall, to shatter it into a million pieces and pretend it never happened. Part of me, the mother in me, wanted to find excuses for David, to believe he had just snapped under pressure, that he didn't mean it. But the other part of me, the part that had survived droughts and recessions, the part that had stood shoulder to shoulder with Frank as we clawed our way to the top, I knew that sentiment was a luxury I could no longer afford. I needed to see the unvarnished truth. My hand was shaking as I pressed the play button. The video started with the sounds of a happy family. Jacob was laughing at something. I could hear my own voice, bright and cheerful. The camera panned unsteadily across the beautifully set table, the glittering tree. It was a perfect Christmas scene. And then, The camera settled on me as I approached the head of the table. Watching it from this third-person perspective was a brutal, out-of-body experience. I saw it all, with a clarity that stole my breath. I saw David's approach, his face a mask of false confidence. I heard his cold, rehearsed words. I saw my own confused, hurt expression. And then I saw the push. It was worse than I remembered. It wasn't a moment of lost temper. It was deliberate, calculated. It was an act of violence. I watched my own 72-year-old body stumble backward, my arms flailing, my face a mask of pure shock. I saw the fall, the sickening thud, as I hit the unforgiving marble. But it was the aftermath that truly turned my blood to ice. As my on-screen self lay stunned on the floor, the camera, still recording, caught the reactions. David stood over me, his expression not of horror or regret, but of grim, resolute justification. And behind him, I saw Monica. The mask slipped. For one fleeting, terrible second, a smirk of pure, unadulterated triumph curled her lips. She had won. In that instant, watching that smirk, something inside me broke. But it wasn't my spirit. It was the last, fragile thread of maternal love and denial that I had been clinging to. The pain didn't vanish, but it began to change, to transmute. It cooled and hardened, crystallizing from raw, weeping grief into something sharp, dense, and powerful. It became rage. A cold, clear, and focused rage. I didn't cry. The tears that had been welling in my eyes simply evaporated, burned away by this new volcanic heat rising within me. The woman who had been pushed to the floor was a victim. The woman watching this video was not. My gaze drifted from the phone screen to the large, silver-framed photograph on my bedside table. It was Frank, taken on our 40th anniversary. He was smiling, his eyes crinkling at the corners, full of the strength and love that had been the bedrock of my life. I looked at his image, and it wasn't a plea for help. It was a promise. They will not destroy what we built, Frank. I will not let them. My hand, which had been trembling moments before, was now perfectly steady. My movements were calm, deliberate. I stood up, walked to my nightstand, and picked up my own phone. My fingers didn't falter as I scrolled through my contacts and found the name Charles Bennett. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm with holiday cheer. "Margaret, Merry Christmas." I took a breath. When I spoke, my voice was not the voice of a weeping, broken old woman. It was a voice he hadn't heard in years, the voice of the woman who had once stared down bankers and union bosses without blinking. It was choked with emotion, yes, but it was layered with steel. It was the voice of a queen reclaiming her throne. "Charles," I said, my words precise and deadly. "I have the proof. Activate it." Christmas morning dawned bright and cold over Dallas. In David and Monica's sterile, modernist mansion, a house of glass and white marble that had always felt more like a corporate headquarters than a home, the mood was one of triumphant celebration. They had done it. The coup was complete. I imagined them waking late, wrapped in $1,000 sheets, the previous night's ugliness already a distant, justified memory. They would see it not as a betrayal, but as a necessary business decision, a changing of the guard. They were the future, I was the past. There would have been no frantic, early morning rush of children eager for presents. Emily and Jacob were with me at the ranch, a fact that probably brought David and Monica a sense of relief. They could celebrate their victory in peace. I see them in my mind's eye, standing in their cavernous living room, glasses of expensive champagne in hand, toasting each other in front of a ridiculously oversized, professionally decorated Christmas tree that was as perfect and soulless as the rest of their house. "To the new era of Ellison construction," Monica would have said, her voice smug, her eyes glittering with ambition. "And to its new chairman." She would clink her glass against David's, the crystal ringing out in the quiet house. "To us," David would reply, a proud, foolish smile spreading across his face. He finally felt like the man of the house, the king of the castle. He was blind to the fact that he was merely a prince consort, and Monica was the one truly wearing the crown. He probably expected his phone to be blowing up. He likely anticipated a barrage of angry, tearful, or pleading calls from me. 47 missed calls. 100 desperate texts. That's what he would have considered a victory. It would have fed his ego, confirming that he had broken me, that I was now powerless, and pleading for scraps from his table. But the morning passed in silence. My number never appeared on his screen. It was Monica, of course, who saw it first. She was surgically attached to her phone, her thumb in a state of perpetual scrolling. While David was admiring a new, obscenely expensive watch she had gifted him, she was scanning his emails, which he had long ago given her full access to. "Well, well," she would have murmured, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips. "What have we here?" David, still basking in the glow of his new authority, would have looked over her shoulder. "What is it?" "An email," she'd say, her tone dripping with amusement. "From Charles Bennett's office, sent at 6 a.m. on Christmas morning. How festive." I can picture them reading it together, their heads bent over the small, glowing screen. The language of the email would have been brutally formal, stripped of all sentiment. It was pure legal ice. Subject: Formal Notice of Intent to Enforce Clause 12B of the Ellison Family Trust and Holdings Agreement. Dear Mr. Ellison, this letter serves as formal and official notification that, as of 9 p.m., on December 24th, a triggering event as defined in Clause 12B of the aforementioned agreement has occurred. Consequently, Mrs. Margaret Ellison is hereby exercising her irrevocable right to purchase your full and complete controlling interest, 51%, in Ellison Construction Incorporated. As stipulated, the purchase price for this transfer of shares is contractually fixed at the sum of $1 USD. Please expect to receive formal transfer documents and further instructions from our office within the next business day. We advise you to secure legal counsel. Sincerely, Charles Bennett, Associates. There would have been a moment of stunned silence as they processed the words. Then, the laughter would begin. It wouldn't be a small chuckle of disbelief. It would be a full-throated, condescending roar. Monica would throw her head back and laugh, a sharp, ugly sound that echoed off the marble floors. "Is she serious?" Monica would gasp, wiping a tear of mirth from her eye. $1? The old woman has finally lost her mind. This is pathetic. David's own laughter would be a beat behind hers, a little less certain at first, but then growing in volume as he took his cue from his wife. "She's bluffing. It's a scare tactic. What did she think? That I'd see this and come running back to her, begging for forgiveness? It's a Hail Mary pass from a quarterback with a broken arm," Monica would sneer, her confidence absolute. "She's got nothing. The clause itself is probably unenforceable, some sentimental nonsense your father cooked up that would never hold up in court." They would have dissected it, picking it apart with the arrogance of people who believe they are untouchable. Their entire analysis would have hinged on one simple, fatally flawed assumption. "And let's be real," David would say, puffing out his chest. "Even if, in some fantasy world, this clause was ironclad, where would she get the money?" Monica would nod, swirling her champagne. "Exactly. She's asset-rich but cash-poor. All her wealth is tied up in the company you control. To buy you out, she'd need access to hundreds of millions in liquid capital to cover the company's debts and operational costs, even if the share price is $1. No bank would ever give her that kind of loan without the company as collateral, and we would never approve it. It's a dead end. She has absolutely no way to fund it. She doesn't have a leg to stand on." They were so sure, so wrapped up in their own cleverness. They saw the world through a lens of balance sheets and stock prices, and in that world they were invincible. They couldn't conceive of a strategy that relied on anything else. The idea that my power might come from a source they couldn't quantify, from loyalty, from a father's foresight, from a granddaughter's love, was completely alien to them. So they dismissed it. They laughed it off as the desperate last-ditch effort of a bitter old woman. They had fought a battle of brute force and won. They had no idea that I was fighting a completely different war on a battlefield they couldn't even see. They deleted the email, poured another glass of champagne, and went about their Christmas day, secure in the knowledge that they had won. They were celebrating a victory, completely unaware that the single quiet email they had just laughed at wasn't a pathetic bluff. It was the sound of a well-oiled guillotine sliding into place. While David and Monica were laughing in their glass house, Helen was sitting in the quiet, silk-paneled study of her own home, and she was not laughing at all. Monica, in her gloating triumph, had forwarded Charles Bennett's email to her mother with a simple, smug message attached. "Can you believe the nerve? She's officially lost it. Lol." Helen read the email once. Then she read it again, her perfectly manicured fingers scrolling slowly down the screen. There was no amusement in her cold, intelligent eyes. David and Monica saw a pathetic bluff. Helen saw a declaration of war from a player she had never underestimated. She knew my late husband, Frank. He was a brilliant, tough-as-nails businessman, but he was also a sentimentalist when it came to his family. This poison pill clause, however, was not the work of a sentimentalist. It was the cold, hard calculation of a master strategist. Frank Ellison did not build half measures into his legal directives. If the clause existed, Helen knew with chilling certainty it was ironclad. More importantly, she knew me. She had spent years observing me, studying me with the detached curiosity of a biologist examining a rival species. She knew that beneath the polite exterior of the society hostess and doting grandmother was the woman who had helped Frank build his empire. I was not prone to hysterics. I did not make empty threats. If I had told Charles Bennett to activate that clause, it was because I held a winning hand. The only question was, what was my ace in the hole? The phrase, provable and irrefutable public humiliation, stuck in her mind. What proof could I possibly have? A witness? A recording? It didn't matter. The fact that I was confident enough to make the move was all the proof Helen needed that David and Monica had blundered, and blundered badly. They had mistaken a sleeping lioness for a house cat, and now they were about to get mauled. Helen did not waste a single second on recriminations. Emotion was a liability. Action was everything. She immediately saw the new shape of the battlefield. This was no longer a simple, two-sided coup. It was a chaotic mess, and chaos was a ladder. Her first call was to her publicist. "Michael, darling," she said, her voice a mask of distress and sorrow. "Something terrible has happened. An internal family matter has escalated. I need you to release a statement on my behalf immediately." Within the hour, a carefully worded statement was leaked to the Dallas Society pages and key financial news outlets. Helen de Winter is profoundly saddened and deeply disturbed by the recent reports of a conflict within the Ellison family. She was not party to, nor did she have any prior knowledge of, the regrettable incident that took place on Christmas Eve. Her only wish is for a swift and peaceful resolution. Her primary concern at this time, as it has always been, is for the stability of Ellison Construction and the preservation of the legacy of its great founder, the late Frank Ellison. It was a masterpiece of plausible deniability. With a few sentences, she had painted herself as a concerned, innocent bystander. She had publicly condemned David's actions without ever mentioning his name, severing herself from him like a surgeon excising a tumor. She had thrown her own daughter and son-in-law directly under the bus while positioning herself as the noble guardian of Frank's legacy. The snake had shed its skin. Her second phase began immediately after. She picked up her private phone and started making calls, not to lawyers, but to the handful of key members on the Ellison Construction Board of Directors. Her first call was to John Carmichael, a gruff, old-school oil man who had served on the board with Frank for 30 years. "John, it's Helen," she said, her voice now filled with a different kind of performance, that of a trusted peer in a time of crisis. "I'm afraid I'm calling with terrible news. I'm sure you'll be hearing whispers soon, so I wanted you to hear it from me first." She laid out a carefully edited version of the story. David, under immense pressure, had suffered a lapse in judgment and behaved appallingly toward me. As a result, I, in a state of understandable emotional distress, was now making rash legal threats that could destabilize the entire company. "This is no longer a family squabble, John," she said, her voice low and serious. "This is a 5-alarm fire. David has proven he is too volatile to lead. Margaret, God love her, is thinking with her heart, not her head. The company is about to be torn apart by their personal war. The shareholders are going to panic." She let him absorb the impending disaster. Then she offered the solution. "The board needs to act," she said calmly. "We need a steady, neutral hand at the tiller to guide us through this storm, someone who isn't emotionally compromised. someone who respected Frank and who can protect what he built. I am prepared to put my name forward to serve as interim chairwoman until this unfortunate crisis is resolved. She wasn't an ally of David and Monica, fighting for their control. She wasn't an ally of mine, seeking to restore order. She was a third power, emerging from the smoke and chaos. She was a shark that had been circling, and having smelled blood in the water, she was now making her move. The war for Ellison Construction was no longer a duel. It was now a viper's nest, and the three-way battle had officially begun. The first 48 hours after Christmas were a brutal lesson in modern finance. As Monica had so smugly predicted, my plan hit a brick wall, and it hit hard. I went to the banks, the same institutions where the Ellison name had been golden for 40 years. I met with bankers who had called my husband a friend, men who had attended his funeral and spoken of his integrity. They were all very polite. They offered me coffee and condolences. And then, one by one, they turned me down flat. David had been busy. He had used his power as CEO to poison the well, warning every major lender in Dallas that Ellison Construction was in the midst of a hostile takeover attempt and that any capital loaned to me would be at extreme risk. He painted me as an unstable, emotional widow on a vendetta. He made me a pariah overnight. By the third day, I was at my wit's end. I had a loaded gun, but I had no ammunition to fire it. Charles Bennett and I sat in his office, the grim reality of our situation settling over us. We had the law on our side, but in the world of high finance, cash is king, and our coffers were empty. "There's no one left to ask, Margaret," Charles said, the defeat heavy in his voice. I stared out his window at the steel and glass canyons of the city. He was wrong. There was one person left. One name so unthinkable, so far beyond the pale, that I hadn't even allowed myself to consider it until now. "Get me a meeting with Arthur Vance," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Charles looked at me as if I had just suggested we set the building on fire. "Arthur Vance? Margaret, are you out of your mind?" He was Frank's bitterest rival. They spent 30 years trying to put each other out of business. The man is a shark. "I know exactly who he is," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "And right now, a shark is exactly what I need." Arthur Vance's mansion was the physical opposite of my home. Where the Ellison Ranch was warm wood, worn leather, and treasured memories, his home was a monument to cold, modern power. It was all glass, white marble, and sharp angles, filled with abstract art that I found jarring and soulless. It was the home of a man who admired strategy, not sentiment. He met me himself in a vast, minimalist living room that overlooked the city. At 75, Arthur was lean and sharp, his eyes a pale, piercing blue that missed nothing. We had been social adversaries for decades, but we had always shared a quiet, grudging respect for one another's intellect. He respected me far more than he had ever respected my son. "Margaret," he said, foregoing any pleasantries, "to what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" I didn't sit down. I had not come for a social call. "Let's cut to the chase, Arthur. You've heard the rumors." "I hear everything," he replied, a faint, calculating smile on his lips. "My son has locked me out of my own company. I have a legal mechanism to take it back, but he's blocked me at every bank in the state. I'm legally entitled to buy his shares, but I lack the capital to run the company once I do. I am backed into a corner." He watched me, his expression unreadable, letting the silence hang in the air. "I need your money, Arthur," I said, laying my cards on the table. "And you need the one thing you've never been able to get, a door into Ellison Construction, a door that only I can open for you." He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the city below, his hands clasped behind his back. He knew the deal of a lifetime when he saw it. He was the only person in Texas with the resources and the nerve to defy David, and the only one who would relish the fight. He turned back to face me. 40%, he said, his voice flat and non-negotiable. "I'll provide the full line of credit you need to operate, and I'll fund your legal battle to the bitter end. In exchange, upon your successful acquisition of your son's shares, you will sign over 40% of the company to me. That's my price." It was a devil's bargain. I would be giving away nearly half of the empire Frank and I had built. I would be handing our greatest enemy a stake in our legacy. But the alternative was to let it all fall into the undeserving, incompetent hands of Monica and David, to let them tarnish everything Frank had stood for. I didn't hesitate. You have a deal. I held out my hand. Arthur Vance looked at it for a moment, then took it in his own firm, dry grip. The handshake was brief, businesslike. An unholy alliance had just been formed. I had sacrificed a piece of my kingdom, but in doing so, I had just bought myself an army. The Ellison Construction Boardroom is on the top floor of a skyscraper in downtown Dallas. It's a space designed to project power, with a 20-foot-long mahogany table polished to a mirror shine and a wall of glass offering a god's-eye view of the city we had built. I had chosen the decor myself years ago, but on that morning, walking into it felt like entering a foreign country. They were all there, the entire board of directors, a collection of grim-faced men in expensive suits, summoned by their CEO for an emergency meeting. At the head of the table, in the seats that had once belonged to Frank and me, sat David and Monica. My son looked every bit the part of the powerful executive, his suit perfectly tailored, his hair perfectly coiffed. He radiated an air of impatient authority. Beside him, Monica was a portrait of icy composure, her hands folded neatly on the table, a slim leather portfolio in front of her. They looked confident, invincible. From their perspective, this was the final act. They had weathered my pathetic legal threat, secured the banks, and were now about to publicly consolidate their power and formally cast me out. They thought this meeting was their coronation. They had no idea it was their execution. The room fell silent as the heavy oak doors swung open. Every head turned. The expressions on the faces of the board members shifted from nervous anticipation to stunned disbelief. David's jaw literally dropped. I walked in first, my steps slow and deliberate on the plush carpet. I wore a simple but impeccably tailored navy blue suit, my hair styled, my expression serene. I was not the hysterical old woman they were expecting. I was the matriarch of Ellison Construction, and I had come to reclaim my house. The second shockwave hit the room a moment later as Charles Bennett followed me in, carrying a briefcase. The third, and most powerful, was the man who entered behind him, Arthur Vance. The sight of my husband's greatest rival walking into the Ellison boardroom sent a ripple of audible gasps through the room. Arthur, looking perfectly at ease in his own bespoke suit, simply nodded to the assembled board members as if he were attending a regular Tuesday meeting. He was followed by a team of 3 sharp, predatory-looking lawyers from his own firm who moved with the silent efficiency of a wolf pack. I saw Helen, seated at the far end of the table. She had positioned herself as the wise elder, the neutral party ready to step in and save the company from the family's implosion. Her mask of calm was flawless, but I saw the flicker of genuine shock in her eyes as she took in the sight of Arthur Vance. This was a variable she had not accounted for. Her carefully constructed plans had just been hit by a tornado. David was the first to find his voice. He shot to his feet, his face turning a blotchy red. "What is the meaning of this? Mother, you are not welcome here. And him?" He jabbed a trembling finger toward Arthur. "This is a private meeting of the Ellison Construction Board of Directors. Security." 2 security guards who had been standing by the door took a step forward, but Charles held up a hand. "That won't be necessary," Charles said, his voice calm and authoritative, cutting through David's blustering. "Mrs. Ellison is here as the primary stakeholder of the Ellison Family Trust, and Mr. Vance is here as her financial counsel." "Financial counsel?" Monica scoffed, her voice dripping with derision. "What is this? A joke? You have no standing here. We are moving to have you formally removed from the trust on grounds of incompetence." "All in due time," Charles said smoothly, not rising to the bait. "But first, there is the matter of the agenda item I submitted this morning. The enforcement of Clause 12B. David let out a harsh, barking laugh. Clause 12B is a fantasy. It's a non-binding, sentimental piece of garbage, and you have absolutely no grounds to enforce it. This meeting is over. Get out." "On the contrary," Charles said, opening his briefcase, "the grounds are, unfortunately, quite solid." He retrieved a small, slim laptop and a projector remote. "As you all know," he said, Addressing the now utterly bewildered board, Clause 12B is a unique provision triggered by an act of provable and irrefutable public humiliation against Mrs. Ellison by the acting CEO. We are here today to provide that proof. A palpable tension seized the room. The board members shifted in their seats, exchanging uneasy looks. David and Monica stared, a flicker of uncertainty finally breaking through their arrogant facade. What proof could we possibly have? This is ridiculous, David stammered, but his voice had lost its conviction. Charles didn't answer. He simply aimed the remote at the large screen that descended silently from the ceiling at the far end of the room and pressed a button. The screen flickered to life. For a moment, there was just the image of our beautifully decorated dining room, the Christmas tree glittering, the candles glowing. The sound of cheerful family chatter filled the silent boardroom. I saw a few of the board members relax slightly. This was just a home video. Then the camera found me. It found David. The audio became sharp and clear. Every person in that room heard my son's voice, cold and cruel. "That seat, Helen will be sitting there tonight." They heard my confused reply, my attempt to laugh it off. They heard him snap back, his voice rising with anger. "It represents the past. You're stuck in the past, Mother. It's my house now." I watched David's face as he was forced to listen to his own cruel words echo through the chamber of his power. The color was draining from his cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, grayish pallor. Monica sat frozen beside him, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the table. Across the room, Helen's serene mask had finally cracked, replaced by a look of cold, furious disbelief. She was watching her puppet, her chosen king, publicly immolate himself. Then came the moment. On the giant screen, every person in that room saw my son place his hand on my shoulder. They saw him push me. They saw me, their founder's wife, a 72-year-old woman, stumble and fall hard on the marble floor. The collective gasp in the boardroom was sharp and visceral. One of the older board members, a man who had known me for 30 years, muttered, "Good God." The video wasn't done. The sound of my wine glass shattering on the floor was like a gunshot in the tomb-like silence of the room. And then the camera, in its shaky, amateur horror, caught the final, damning detail, Monica's triumphant smirk. That was it. That was the kill shot. The image of that smirk, projected 10 feet high for the entire leadership of Ellison Construction to see, was more devastating than the fall itself. It revealed the malice, the conspiracy, the cold-blooded intent behind the act. Charles clicked the remote, and the screen went black. No one spoke. No one moved. The silence that filled the room was absolute, profound, and suffocating. It was the silence of a tomb. All eyes were on David. He was slumped in his chair, his mouth slightly open, his face as white as a sheet. He looked like a man who had just watched his own soul die. He was utterly, completely, and irrevocably broken. I let the silence hang for a long, heavy moment. I let them all absorb the full weight of what they had just witnessed. I let them sit with the ugliness of it, the shame of it. Then I rose slowly from my chair. I reached into my jacket pocket and withdrew a single, crisp, $1 bill. I walked the length of the table, my heels clicking softly on the floor, the only sound in the world. I stopped beside my son's chair. He didn't look up at me. He couldn't. I placed the dollar bill on the polished mahogany table, directly in front of him. It lay there, a small, green rectangle of ultimate ruin. My voice, when I spoke, was not loud. It did not need to be. It was calm, clear, and carried the weight of absolute victory. According to the clause, I said, my gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the board, this company is now mine. The only person in the room who wasn't in a state of shock was Arthur Vance. He was leaning back in his chair, a small, almost imperceptible smile of pure, intellectual satisfaction on his face. He had not come to see a fight. He had come to witness a masterpiece of strategy. And he had not been disappointed. In the days that followed the board meeting, a deep and unnatural quiet settled over the Ellison ranch. The dust from the explosion had settled, but the air was still thick with the fallout. The war was over, but the silence that remained was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a graveyard. David and Monica came to collect their things on a gray, overcast afternoon. There was no confrontation, no final, dramatic showdown. The time for words, for anger, for anything but the grim business of severance was long past. They moved through the house like ghosts, their footfalls echoing in the empty halls. I watched them from the landing of the grand staircase, unseen. David was a hollowed-out version of the son I once knew. His shoulders were slumped, his face was gaunt and colorless, and he avoided looking at anything for too long, as if the very objects in his childhood home were now judging him. He packed his belongings with the slow, mechanical movements of a man in a trance, a man who had lost everything and was only now beginning to comprehend the depths of his own foolishness. He had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. Monica was a different story. Her silence was not born of shock or shame. It was a coiled, furious thing. She packed with a brutal, angry efficiency, her movements sharp and jerky. She slammed drawers and cupboards shut, the sounds like punctuation marks in her wordless rage. She didn't look broken. She looked like a cornered animal, temporarily defeated but already plotting her next move from the ruins of this one. She didn't spare a single glance for the home she had schemed so desperately to control. For her, it was just a prize that had been snatched from her grasp. As they carried the last of their designer suitcases out the door, she never once looked back. Helen, in her typical fashion, had been far more pragmatic. She hadn't bothered with a formal farewell. By the time the ink was dry on the preliminary transfer documents, she had already vanished. No phone call, no note. She had simply disappeared from our lives as cleanly and silently as she had entered them. She had played her hand and lost, and like any good gambler, she knew when to fold and walk away from the table without a fuss. She had cut her losses and moved on to the next game. After they were all gone, I walked through the quiet rooms of my house. It felt cavernous, empty. The grand dining room where my humiliation had been staged was now just a room with a table. The living room, where we had once laughed and opened Christmas presents, was just a space with furniture. The victory I had fought so hard for felt profoundly hollow. There was no surge of triumph, no feeling of vindication. I just felt tired, a deep, soul-crushing weariness that settled into my bones. The taste of victory was the taste of ash in my mouth. The next day, Arthur Vance came to the ranch. He didn't bring his team of lawyers this time. He came alone. We sat in Frank's study, a room where so many landmark deals had been signed. Charles Bennett was there with me, and he laid out the final, ironclad documents on the massive oak desk. The paperwork that would formally transfer 40% of Ellison Construction to my husband's greatest rival. Arthur read through the documents with his usual sharp, dispassionate focus. He wasn't gloating. This wasn't personal for him. It was just business. And it had been a very, very good piece of business. "It's all in order," he said finally, placing the papers down. "A deal's a deal, Arthur," I said, my voice steady. I picked up the heavy, gold-plated pen that had belonged to Frank, the one he'd used to sign the company's incorporation papers all those years ago. For a fleeting second, my hand hesitated over the signature line. This was it. I was willingly giving away a massive piece of the legacy Frank and I had bled for. I was letting the enemy through the gates. But I remembered David's face, Monica's smirk, and my resolve hardened. I had saved the soul of the company, even if it meant sacrificing a part of its body. I signed my name. The stroke of the pen was the only sound in the room. I pushed the documents across the desk to Arthur. He countersigned without a word, his own signature a sharp, angular script. It was done. He stood up, gathering his copies. "You fought a good fight, Margaret," he said, a note of genuine, intellectual respect in his voice. It was the highest compliment he was capable of giving. "Frank would have been proud of your strategy. Frank would have hated that it ever came to this," I replied softly. He gave a curt nod, as if to concede the point, and then he left. I sat there in the study, staring at the empty chair where he had been, feeling the full weight of what I had just done. I had won the war, but the cost had been staggering. My son was gone. My family was fractured, and my company was now partially owned by a shark. Was this what I had wanted? Power? Control? No. I realized with a sudden, painful clarity that all I had ever truly wanted was the peace that had been stolen from me. I was still sitting there, lost in the quiet wreckage of my thoughts, when I heard a different kind of sound break the silence. It wasn't the sound of packing or lawyers. It was the sound of life. The thunder of small feet on the grand staircase, the sound of unrestrained laughter. The study door burst open, and Jacob and Emily tumbled in. "Grandma!" Jacob yelled, launching himself at me. His arms wrapped around my neck in a tight, fierce hug that almost knocked the wind out of me. Emily was right behind him, her arms wrapping around us both. She rested her head on my shoulder, her grip just as strong. "We saw the cars leave," Emily whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Are you okay?" I held my grandchildren, my two precious, beautiful grandchildren, and for the first time in days, I felt something other than exhaustion and grief. I breathed in the scent of their hair, felt the warmth of their small, strong bodies clinging to me. This was real. "We're not going anywhere, Grandma," Jacob said, his voice muffled against my suit jacket. "We're going to stay here with you, always." Tears, hot and real, finally welled in my eyes and spilled down my cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of a deep, profound, and heartbreaking relief. I had lost a son, but I had not lost my family. I had lost a piece of my company, but I had not lost my legacy. My legacy was right here, holding me, loving me. And in that moment, surrounded by the ashes of my old life, I finally felt the first fragile flicker of a new and different kind of peace. A year has passed. The seasons have turned, and so has my life. I no longer live at the Ellison Ranch. The grand, silent house with its sprawling lands and painful memories was a gilded cage, and I have finally set myself free. My home now is a small, beautiful house nestled on the shore of a quiet lake, a little ways outside of Dallas. It's a house filled not with the ghosts of the past, but with sunlight and the scent of lake water and baking bread. Instead of long, echoing hallways, I have cozy rooms filled with books. Instead of acres of manicured lawns, I have a small, wild, and beautiful garden that I tend to myself. This morning, the Texas sun is warm on my back as I prune my rose bushes. The petals are a deep, velvety red, and their fragrance fills the air. This is where I find my peace now, with my hands in the soil, coaxing life from the earth. The silence here is different from the silence at the ranch. It isn't an absence of sound, it's a presence of peace. It's the gentle lapping of water against the shore, the buzz of a honeybee, the cheerful, uncomplicated song of a cardinal in the old oak tree. A familiar crunch of tires on the gravel driveway pulls me from my thoughts. A smile spreads across my face, genuine and easy. I pull off my gardening gloves and turn just as two figures spill out of a car, their laughter preceding them. "Grandma," Jacob yells, his 14-year-old voice cracking with the endearing awkwardness of adolescence. He's all long limbs and boundless energy, and he closes the distance between us in a few loping strides, wrapping me in a hug that lifts me clean off the ground. Emily, now a poised and graceful 17, follows at a more sedate pace, but her smile is just as bright. "We brought you that new mystery novel you wanted," she says, holding up a book as she gives me her own warm embrace. "And Jacob ate half the cookies we were supposed to bring on the drive over." "Did not," Jacob protests, his mouth already full of another cookie. Their weekend visits are the rhythm of my new life, the steady, joyful beat of my heart. We spend our time fishing off the small wooden dock, baking, playing board games, and talking. We talk about everything: their friends, their school, their dreams for the future. We never talk about that Christmas. We don't have to. We survived it, and the bond forged between us in that fire is stronger than steel. After the boardroom meeting, the path forward became surprisingly clear. The fight had taken its toll, and I had no desire to return to the cutthroat world of corporate power plays. Arthur Vance, true to his nature, saw an opportunity. He made me an offer, not for another 40%, but for the rest of my controlling interest in Ellison Construction. It was a fair offer, a ridiculously generous one. He didn't have to make it. He already had his foot in the door. But I think in his own way he understood. He wasn't just buying a company. He was buying my freedom, and he knew the price was high. I accepted. I kept only a small, non-controlling block of shares, which I placed into a tightly managed trust fund for Emily and Jacob. My children's children would never have to worry about money, but they would have to make their own way in the world. They would have to build their own legacies, not inherit a tarnished one. I walked away from the empire I helped build. I left the money, the power, the influence, and the name on the side of the skyscraper, and I have never, for one single moment, regretted it. Later that afternoon, after a long and lazy lunch on the porch, Emily brings me the mail. It's the usual collection of bills and catalogs, but there's one thing that stands out: a postcard. The picture on the front is of a sleek, modern skyscraper in Shanghai. The handwriting on the back is sharp and angular, instantly recognizable. Margaret, heard you sold the rest of your shares. Smart move. You won, you know. You always win. A.V. I hold the postcard for a long time, looking at Arthur's familiar, arrogant script. He thinks I won the war we fought, the corporate battle, the fight for control of Ellison Construction. He sees the world in terms of wins and losses, of territories conquered and deals closed. He will never understand the truth. My victory wasn't the moment I placed that dollar bill on the boardroom table. My victory wasn't bankrupting my son or outmaneuvering my enemies. My real victory is this. It's the warmth of the sun on my face. It's the sound of my grandson's laughter as he skips a stone across the lake. It's the quiet pride in my granddaughter's eyes as she talks about the university she wants to attend. They tried to take everything from me. My home, my company, my dignity. They thought those things were the source of my strength. They thought power was something you owned, a title you held, a number in a bank account. They were so busy fighting for the throne, they never realized that the real kingdom was something you carry inside your own heart. They lost the moment they forgot what it means to be a family. I look up from the postcard and out at the sparkling water. Jacob is trying to teach Emily his stone-skipping technique, and she's laughing, her head thrown back in the golden afternoon light. My heart feels full, not with the hollow pride of ownership, but with the quiet, profound joy of belonging. This is my legacy. Not the steel and glass towers downtown, but this peace, this love. This is the one thing they could never have taken from me. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment 1 below. If not, feel free to comment 0 so we know and can improve future videos. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for watching.